To order. Now that we have a senator from both sides of the aisle here, both well respected. Before we get started, I'd like to start in prayer, as our forefathers in the legislature did, as they tackled difficult issues, in addition to saying the pledge, led by Senator Randy Robertson, of not only the American flag, but also the Georgia flag. We have a new pledge here in Georgia. So my Chief of Staff, Michael Gargiulo, is bringing in a flag of both the United States and Georgia now. So, yeah. So to speed things up, let you know a little bit about myself. I represent Northwest Georgia. That's where Alabama and Tennessee come together. I asked the Committee on Assignments in the Senate for this chairmanship of Interstate Cooperation. This committee once had a lot of relevance to it. It has since lost a lot of that relevance, and I made the pitch. I wanted to bring more relevance back to interstate cooperation. Ultimately, we have a lot of issues in our nation, and I want to address those issues and reach across state lines. And that's why I asked for this opportunity to be chairman. The first hearing that we're going to have in a series of hearings of interstate cooperation has to do with the border crisis. Later on in the year, I hope to do a committee hearing as it concerns Tennessee and the water that we have there. Many of the water debacles that the state has had, the lawsuits with Alabama and Florida. I think we can find a solution in the water in Tennessee, and certainly hope to have a committee hearing about that in the future. This committee hearing today, though, will be solely focused on the crisis at the border. And I'd like Senator Josh McLaurin to introduce himself. He is a long friend of mine. We served in the House of Representatives together, and I tell you, he is one of the most respected Democrats in this state. I really appreciate his time on this Friday to be a part of this hearing. And tell us a little bit about your district, Senator.
We'd be happy to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to everybody here. My name is Josh McLaurin. I serve as the senator for the 14th District, which was newly constituted after redistricting in 2021. It's basically all North Fulton County from the top of Lenox Square up to Alpharetta. So it starts in Buckhead and goes up through Sandy Springs, Johns Creek, Roswell, into Alpharetta. I'm an attorney by trade. I've run the gamut in terms of my background and experience: civil litigation, criminal law, aviation most recently. That was fascinating. So a little bit of discussion of borders there. But like the chairman said, longtime friend, I think that this is an issue that all Americans should be concerned about. And it's just a question of what the concerns are and how you tackle them. And so I think what most voters want from us as different parties but trying to serve in the same legislature is to recognize when an issue is important, regardless of what it is you think about how you want to approach it. And so in that spirit, I'm serving at the discretion of the chairman on the subcommittee today, even though I'm not a member of the full committee, but I'm glad to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator. Senator Robertson, would you mind introducing yourself?
Okay. I'm State Senator Randy Robertson. I represent District 29 here in here in Georgia, which covers half the city of Columbus, which is the second largest city in Georgia. Cover all of Harris County, all of Meriwether County, and all of Troup County. And Troup County houses LaGrange, which is one of the fastest growing cities in the southeast United States, the home of Kia. The new home of Remington Firearms that moved from upstate New York and moved their headquarters to here in Georgia, and so they decided to move it to the district of the best senator in the state of Georgia. This is starting my third term. Came in with my good friend, now Senator McLaurin. He and I came through Athens together. And I'm currently the majority whip of the Senate, which means it's my responsibility to attempt to keep up with all the compassion and chaos that's created within the Republican caucus on the Senate side. And I'm here today at the request of the chairman to sit in on here. I'm a 31-year law enforcement officer, a graduate of the FBI National Academy, and I've always been extremely interested in violent crimes against women and children and domestic terrorism. And with the drug issues we have at the border, and with the potential for terrorism that we have at our border, This has always been a fascinating subject for me, and I look forward to the hearings today. Thank you.
Senator, would you mind leading us in the pledge, too?
I do not. If everyone who's willing will stand with me. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
All right, we've got a large list of witnesses today. I want to thank you all for coming here, and thank you for your time. We're going to set up some ground rules for today's hearing to try to make it as concise as possible, not to waste the Texans' times or Georgians' time. Each person is going to be allowed to give an opening statement, each witness of 5 minutes. At that point, we as members will engage in a colloquy of questions with them. I asked each Senate member in total not to have your question go over a minute, just to be cognizant of time. The first two witnesses that I'd like to present is Major General James Carden of the Georgia National Guard. Sir, if you'd like to come up to the front. And Mr. Jason Jones, retired Texas Department of Public Safety captain of Intel and Counterterrorism. So before we start, I want to talk about the goals of this committee. And in the last 6 months or so, I have certainly gotten a reality check of an open border crisis in Texas. This is something that was not on my radar in politics until my hometown, Trenton, Georgia, had some buses that were sent by Governor Abbott of Texas, and we had illegal aliens get off of those buses and into my hometown. They were bound for New York and for Washington, but we certainly got an idea of what it means for every town to be a border town. Then last September, my childhood home in Dade County, Georgia, which my parents Airbnb as a form of bringing themselves prosperity and happiness later in their years, was ransacked by some illegal aliens that were being humanly trafficked. Unfortunately, we don't know where they went, but they lived in our house for a few days, and they all had brand new clothes, no luggage, and you certainly feel sorry for them. You know, you hope that they find a better life. They come from a hard circumstance, but it certainly gave a quick reality to the situation on the ground. Then I go to Rotary Club meetings across my district, and I have superintendents who come up to me and they ask me, what am I going to do? I don't have the money to support the illegal aliens that are coming into my school system. It's very difficult when you don't have an answer to your constituents when they ask us a question like that. There have been over 100 just in my district alone, and I know across the state, similar school districts are feeling this type of financial cost and burden. I talk to my sheriffs, and they talk about fentanyl. There's families in my district who have been lost loved ones due to this animal tranquilizer that's coming in to Georgia at a rapid pace. There's obviously a high financial cost when public safety is being used to fight that type of thing instead of what we consider as normal crime. It's also a financial cost to our healthcare system when we see a lot of indigent patients come in. You know, I know it's cost my district millions, and I know it's cost billions for the whole state of Georgia. But I also want this committee today to focus on the cost of humanity, the human cost, the cost of those indentured servants that came through my childhood home, the cost of those who are being sex trafficked across our state. I think the Texans are going to bring a unique perspective to us Georgians as they've seen firsthand at the border the atrocities there. And ultimately, in my opinion, it's out of control. Obviously, this fentanyl creates more burden in our mental health crisis in Georgia that we all recognize that we have. And I just want this committee hearing to be a reality check to that. I want us to see what the problem really is. And ultimately, by having that knowledge, maybe we can find good solutions to fix the problem. Because it's much bigger than just Texas, it's much bigger than just Georgia. We're going against an international drug cartel. an international human smuggling cartel. And I want to thank the witnesses again for your time being here to give testimony to this. So, Major General Carden, you have the first 5 minutes. I would ask that you tell us what is the Georgia National Guard doing at the border. And to start with, I really want to thank you. Major General presented me with a picture today. This is the Georgia National Guard at the Texas border back in 1916. So this has obviously been a problem for a very long time throughout our history. So, and Senators, I'll get each of you a copy for being a part of this hearing today too. Major General.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Is this mic on? Mic's working? Yes, sir. Okay, great. I'm Major General Tom Carden. I'm the Adjutant General with the Georgia National Guard. It's an honor to be in the same room with you today to talk about the 2,000-mile southwest border and the Georgia National Guard's role in helping the Department of Homeland Security. We currently have 126 members of the Georgia National Guard deployed on the southwest border as part of the military's federal mission to support the Department of Homeland Security. We've had a presence on the border with very few gaps in the modern era. From the time President George Bush, 41, initiated a temporary mission known as Jump Start. The Georgia National Guard has provided the last 3 commanding generals of Joint Task Force North to include the current commanding general of Joint Task Force North. And what they do is manage the entire federal military mission along the southwest border from Brownsville, Texas to San Diego, California. So Georgia's got a lot of skin in the game when it comes to helping our teammates along the southwest border, both our friends in the state of Texas and all of the states along the southwest border, and not to mention every state's really a border state because all of the impacts, Senator, that you mentioned earlier is touching every state in these United States. Joint Task Force North today is made up of 2,336 service members from across the Joint Force. They have 3 key tasks: to detect and monitor migrant traffic until intercepted by the Border Patrol. The second mission set is aviation support. Essentially, they do the same thing from the air. The third and final mission that they have is intelligence support to Customs and Border Protection. That's primarily focused south of the border because a goal line defense is not necessarily a winning strategy, so they're looking deep across our borders to provide some information on things that are coming to the border long before it arrives. In addition to Joint Task Force North, as many of you know, the state of Texas has mobilized about 5,000 members of their National Guard under what they call Operation Lone Star. The service members in that operation are on state active duty, paid for by the state of Texas, and they have law enforcement authorities and work, as we understand it, primarily in support of the Texas Department of Public Safety. You have people that are going to testify today know much more about that than I do. Our general observations and the overall impact of the military mission along the border is an undetermined level of deterrence. So it has some impact, but it's really hard to measure just how much good we're doing. Migrant crossing points, particularly since Operation Lone Star started, appears to have moved a little bit further west. We had a lot of our formation focused on the Rio Grande Valley around McAllen, Texas, and as Operation Lone Star came in, we started seeing those patterns move further west out to El Paso and even further to the west. Barriers constructed by the Texas National Guard, along with all the others, have been helpful in turning seconds into minutes to help Customs and Border Protection do their job. The numbers that you see in the press and the numbers that we see, you see anything from 226,000 illegal crossings in November of 22. The official numbers that I got as of last night says that since 1 October, 85,000 contacts, about 50% were part of Title VIII, which means they process them, give them a summons and release them into the United States, and about half of them under Title 42 were sent back to New Mexico to await adjudication. Again, there are people here that know those numbers far better than I do, but those are sort of the official party line numbers, if you will. Utilizing humans on the border, whether they be soldiers or law enforcement, are really the most expensive and least effective method in addressing illegal immigration in our estimation. So barriers and technology augmented by our Customs and Border Protection, and perhaps with them being augmented somewhat by the United States military is certainly going to be helpful. But trying to stand arm in arm along a 2,000 mile border is not particularly an effective way to control this, but the barriers do seem to be working. And I don't want to get outside of my lane, just the military mission along the border. Again, we've been involved in this for a very, very long time. We're honored to help our teammates with Customs and Border Protection, our teammates over in Texas, and I believe we're doing a little bit of good, and I'll be happy to take your questions.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Major General, for being here today. Fascinating to know the history, right? That the Georgia National Guard has been involved on the border for so long. And I think one thing that's interesting, you get caught up in partisan politics, right? People talking about the border, it becomes kind of a political chip that people play. But you can't ignore the reality that we have been involved. And I assume that this is a federal mission that we've been deployed under. My understanding, there's domestic within Georgia National Guard deployments, and then there's pursuant to federal activity. So if you could just give a very brief overview of sort of the scope of the federal deployment, what is the mandate specifically? I know you're saying that you're kind of getting right to the point that I'm interested in also about, how many people we have and how much of a cost it is and how sustainable it is. But could you just give us a little idea of the architecture of the deployment and who you report to? You say you work with, CBP. What are all the agencies involved?
Well, in this role, the Georgia National Guard is a force provider. And so the Department of Homeland Security does what's called a request for forces to the Department of Defense for augmentations from the military. That falls under Title 10 of the United States Code. So it is a complete federal mission. So the federal government controls the mission. The commander of Joint Task Force North reports to the commander of United States NORTHCOM, the Geographic Combatant Command for all of North America. So that's General Van Herk. And so that's who Major General Smith, the commander of JTF North, reports to. We do not and have not, at least in my tenure, deployed members to the southwest border under Title 32 or state active duty under that provision of the United States Code. So it's 100% federally funded, federally controlled mission, very tight mandates in terms of what their mission sets. They're not to come directly into contact with people coming across the border. That is a professional law enforcement portion of the mission, but they do provide detection, and then they monitor and track those movements of potential illegal crossings, hand that off to the Border Patrol or the Texas Department of Public Safety, and allow the law enforcement professionals to do that mission.
So then if I could, one quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman. If I could sort of sum up the relevant bullet points, it sounds like it's a military mission, completely under federal control. It is under NORCOM. It's not under a federal agency, and there's no direct contact with migrants. It's more planning operations behind the scenes.
Well, obviously, NORTHCOM falls up under the Department of Defense, so that's the federal control and the nexus and the command and control for the entire mission.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Major General, thank you. I appreciate you coming here today and educating us on this. I, like my friend on the other end, appreciate the history. Now, hearing what you said, Jumpstart started under H.W. Bush.
Yes, sir.
And at that time, Georgia became a part of that mission.
Yes, sir.
Have our manpower allocations increased, decreased, or pretty much maintained the same level during that time?
It's fluctuated. It's gone up and down. 2021, I had well over 200 soldiers, and I had 2 Lakota helicopters out there as part of the aviation mission. We've had a lot of aviation support on the border, but the request for forces about 18 or so months ago dropped significantly. So it was about a 500 to 1,000 soldier drop in the federal military mission to augment Customs and Border Protection. So we've seen that fluctuate up and down. The current trend has been down.
That drop, that's overall mission. That's not just Georgia. That's every state, right?
It's the federal mission. When they do when the request for forces comes from Homeland Security and is approved by the Department of Defense, they have reached out. Active duty has done this mission. They've had active duty soldiers on the southwest border. Primarily today, the Guard does the bulk of that 2,336 service members that are doing that mission on the border, and there are many, many states that contribute to that mission set. Yes, sir.
And when you say the mission set, we're back to barriers and technology as being the primary purpose?
The primary purpose is to detect, monitor, provide aviation and intelligence support, full stop.
Is part of the reason that military active and in your group not making contact with these individuals is that somewhat of a posse comitatus understanding that once they cross over onto United States soil, that the jurisdiction falls to the local law enforcement jurisdiction, whether it be county or municipal or?
I think that's a safe bet. Obviously, nobody's had that direct discussion with me, but that logic makes a lot of sense in terms of why we're restricted. Obviously, if they were to go to a Title 32 mindset or legal structure like the Texas National Guard, they do come in contact under Title 32.
Thank you, sir.
Major General, ooh, that's loud. You know, if the National Guard isn't in contact with any of these illegal immigrants, how close are our National Guard soldiers to the border?
I mean, many of the monitoring sites, they have technology, they have binoculars, they have, forward-looking infrared, systems that are mounted on vehicles to help them detect. So, I mean, it's not like they don't, get pretty close. And, I mean, they're literally, in many cases, I've been out there on a visit and watched people walk across the border and sit down at the vehicle, at the monitoring vehicle, and waited on Border Patrol to come and get them.
Are our National Guard troops carrying firearms?
Yes, sir.
Okay. How dangerous do you feel our National Guard soldiers? How dangerous of a situation compared to other places in the world would you say the border is?
The border is obviously a very dangerous place. Not necessarily because of the immigrants coming across the border. It's dangerous because of the cartels, but the cartels really control more of the activity on the border. They literally control the people because they don't want to engage with us, or our observations have been these guys are the pros. Our observation is they don't want to engage with us and start bringing a lot of essentially heat on themselves. So they sort of make people behave on the border with respect to us. Because they don't want to bring any unwanted attention to themselves, because while all of our forces are tied up with these migration patterns, they're able to move the fentanyl and other things into the country while all the human capital is tied up.
How are we doing on time? Good. Okay, so we've got about 3 minutes left. Yeah. Senator Robertson.
I apologize, General. One other thing, you were talking about the reduction in human resources that you said that was about 12 to 18 months ago.
Yes, sir.
Was the cause of that because there were less migrants coming across the border, or was there a reasoning given for that?
Not really. I mean, there's a lot of speculation as to why those numbers drop. I mean, part of it is the Department of Defense. I can't speak for them, but I can tell you, we're in the business of fighting and winning America's wars. And so when you have a service member, a warfighter, manning a static post on the southwest border, that consumes a ton of warfighting readiness. So one might conclude that the Department of Defense is, it takes a look at that impact on how are we going to be ready to fight Russia, how we're going to be ready to fight China if we've got a huge draw for combat power on the southwest border.
So there's a chance that those decisions are made in the Pentagon by real soldiers and by bean counters?
I'd say everybody gets a seat at the table, Senator, but I can't tell you who they are or what their logic might be behind those decisions. But I'm certain that military readiness is a concern at a very minimum.
And it's a very expensive mission, is that not correct?
Yes, sir. It's very expensive.
Thank you.
Senator McLaurin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Major General, you said something really interesting a minute ago. I just want to be sure I understand it. So obviously the mission, as you've described it, is to track migrant flows, where folks are, what their status is, and I think I heard you, but tell me if I heard you incorrectly, say that tracking those flows and having individuals stationed at the border actually trades off to some degree with the ability to track cartel activity in fentanyl specifically. Can you say a little bit more about that trade-off? Because I think it's interesting. A lot of times I think we think about the border in this undifferentiated way, that everything's all together, migrants, drugs, cartel activity, but it sounds like you're saying there's different enforcement priorities and they might trade off.
I think so. Again, you have people here far more qualified to run laps around me in terms of talking about the tactics and how it works. What we have seen from a military perspective is the cartels like very much to control those migrant flows, to essentially overwhelm our capability and that of Customs and Border Protection, and that essentially leaves another gate open for them. We're not seeing, and maybe these gentlemen are, we're not seeing migrants coming across the border with pockets full of fentanyl. We're seeing immigration patterns coming across the border, sucking down a lot of resources, pulling everybody away, and all of those things coming in much larger, more deadly quantities in other areas of the border while we're all tied up looking somewhere else.
That's fascinating, and I appreciate that testimony because I think that helps the people in Georgia understand with a little more detail and nuance kind of how this works. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely, Senator. Major General Cardin, thank you so much for your testimony and answering our questions today. Our next witness will be Mr. Jason Jones, retired Texas Department of Public Safety captain, to shed more light on the situation at the border.
Ladies and gentlemen, how's my audio? Is that okay? Everybody in the back hear me okay? Not too loud? All right, great. It's an honor to be here, Senators. Thank you for the opportunity to talk here about what is without a doubt the most significant threat to the national security and public safety of the American people, and that is these cartels. I know that when you hear about the southwest border, you mostly hear about it through the lens of immigration from the media and many others for multiple reasons. But what I'm here today to do for the next few minutes is kind of peel back that onion and introduce you to the monsters that are these cartels and what they have become. And what we are really talking about here, I want to be very clear on this, is that what you are witnessing in Mexico and what you are witnessing at the southwest border is the largest U.S. intelligence failure since 9/11. I want to say that again, the largest U.S. intelligence failure since 9/11. And I want to explain why I say that. There is not a terrorist organization in the world responsible for killing 100,000 Americans as they have weaponized fentanyl in Mexico and then push that poison into this country. The new data will come out and it will be approximately another 100,000 in 2022, but that's not quite out yet. So let me talk about why I'm here today. After being stationed on that border as a Texas Highway Patrolman in El Paso, as being an undercover narcotics agent buying dope directly from these cartels in Brownsville, Texas, being a lieutenant in Laredo, Texas, as the war, as the cartels call it, between the Zetas and the Gulf emerged in Nuevo Laredo, I was at ground zero during that time. And then I went to headquarters, commanded the Texas Rangers Border Security Operations Center, and tried to save migrants' lives for years as these cartels were absolutely devouring these people. And that story had not been told to the American people. So I retired in 2016, and the reason I'm here today is to get these cartels designated as foreign terrorist organizations so that we can absolutely crush them for what they have done to Americans, what they have done to Mexican citizens, and what they have done to so many migrants crossing through Mexico. So let me share with you the evolution of the cartels and the story that has not been told to the American people for a multitude of reasons. In 2006, the cartels were truly organized crime as we know them, used to know them. The Calderon administration began using their military to go after the cartels, and that's where the insurgency started, because what we were seeing that was not getting out to the American people was unbelievable. We were having 8 and 10-hour gun battles on the border with Texas, across the border, with everything from 50 caliber belt-fed machine guns, light anti-tank weapons, RPGs, and we were stunned as this insurgency began, as the cartels truly fought back against the Calderon administration. And then from that, the Los Zetas former special forces of GAFE, which is basically big army of the Mexican special forces. A branch of them, and about started out originally with 7, then 19, then up to about 35, and ultimately 55, emerged to work with the Gulf Cartel. And what they brought was discipline and tradecraft to the cartels. And this is what was missed by the U.S. intelligence agencies, because all the other cartels were then forced to become hyper-violent to keep up with the Zetas. So how does that impact you here today? It impacts you and your citizens through fentanyl. It impacts your citizens because you have the world coming from all over the world. I mean, when I tell you, if you've been on that southwest border, if you think it's a U.S.-Mexico problem, ladies and gentlemen, the world has shifted, and the world is coming. And these cartels are supporting those movements. The other part of this is the adjustment of these cartels from human smuggling into the trafficking of people. We have never seen what we've seen at that border, never, when it comes to that adjustment. And what I mean by that, and I'm just going to show you here too real quick, is that if you are dealing in your state with stash houses, if you are dealing in this state with bailouts, if you are dealing with the death of your citizens from fentanyl, you need to know that is linked to 2 major cartels, the Sinaloans and Cartel Jalisco New Generation, known as CJ&G, and I want to introduce you to them now. I broke this story in 2020. What you are witnessing is the elite group of CJ&G. This group is their enforcement wing. This was the first time they tried to put a hit out on my life for getting this out worldwide. There have been millions of views of what you are seeing here. This is just one wing of Cartel Jalisco New Generation, and I ask you, these look like drug traffickers. You're looking at first, second, third, and fourth generation armored vehicles. They go through basic, they go through intermediate, and they go through advanced training. From former military operatives within GAFE, former from the U.S., and from Guatemala. A lot of K-Bill Special Forces members are supporting Cartel Jalisco New Generation in their training and trade And I know you're thinking, well, I'm glad that's just in deep Mexico. Let me show you Texas. This is 80 miles into the United States. And what you're going to see is a Gulf Cartel operative smuggling people. And I want you to look at the weapon system that he's using over 80 miles into Texas. Same trade craft, and look at the light bar up on top of the dash. That's exactly the same trade craft we will see in Mexico. And what they're doing here is they're moving what we call a high value, someone in a leadership position within the cartels to try to get them further into the country. And they're just jumping them from one location to the next through back roads. I know you're thinking right now probably, well, I'm glad I don't live in Texas, right? Even though we got that problem. Let me show you this year. What you're seeing is Interstate 10 in Arizona. That is a Arizona state trooper 70 miles into the United States. I want you to look at what this Sinaloan cartel member is carrying. You're witnessing a 50 caliber Barrett rifle. Look at his chest rig, his AK-47, his M4, and his Glocks as he passes this state trooper, and then you're going to see another one. So if you're thinking that this is a Mexico problem, ladies and gentlemen, you have not been briefed what is really happening in the influx of these cartels. So if you are wondering why the state of Texas has spent $4 billion with a B of state funds, it is not just for the migration issues that you're told about from most of the media. It is because what we are facing is unprecedented. The transnational crime impacts on this country are not being measured, and we can talk about the solutions and all those things, but that's what I have. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for that testimony. Senator McLaurin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and want to first just offer my respect for your experience and the amount of work that you've done directly in this situation. I mean, again, it's when you're an attorney from Georgia who I have no military law enforcement experience, I have to be careful how much I speak on these issues because I haven't, been in the zone. So, I want to first offer my respect for that. The thing I want to ask you about is, and you say we can talk about solutions. I'm curious sort of about two things, the economic climate in Mexico for these cartels to emerge the political climate, right, in terms of their own domestic law enforcement, military capabilities. Can you give us, again, kind of similar style question as I asked the Major General, just a broad overview of why is it politically, economically that these cartels take the foothold that they take?
You bet, absolutely. And why do we see them today where really you have to remember they are a true parallel government in Mexico today, because after they went through an insurgency into terrorism, which we worked many of those cases where they were executing men, women, and children, cutting them into pieces, and then guisoing the bodies, because they will tell you that if you can't count a body that doesn't exist, which is why they burn the bodies. But what they have truly become is a parallel government. But what has really not gotten out is how and why that happened. In the last national election, Senator, a lot of Americans are not aware, but you can Google this. 132 politicians in Mexico in the last national election were killed, including staffers and others, just during that national election. So if we were sitting here right now and you and I were debriefing a cartel leader, and I was to say to him, what's the difference between the government of Mexico and the cartels? He would laugh. And he would say, sir, there's no difference. They're one and the same. Because as these cartel leaders put people into positions of power, someone within the cartel goes in. The corruption level in Mexico is at the highest levels. That's the real truth of it. And so when you talk about the economic drivers in this, the trade in Mexico along your border specifically, the cartels call that the front line. And you hear this term operational control, right? How do they control that? But no one ever tells you, sir, how they do it. They utilize what's known as a halcon network, or the lookouts or falcons. And every bend in that river is called a gate, which you heard the general talk about. And it's very dynamic. So when you talk about the movement of goods, whether that's a child, whether that's a man or a woman, whether that's drugs, everything is a commodity to them. So they battle for control of these plazas. Once they control a plaza, they control the movement of all of those illicit and sometimes legitimate goods in and out of the country. So just as he was trying to explain, they're so dynamic in what they'll do. They will push literally hundreds of men, women, and children directly to Border Patrol, and then on the sides they'll skirt them. And that's when deadly fentanyl will go. Usually those two don't overlap, but not always. The game is so dynamic. And I will tell you, too, another thing you need to know when we talk about your southwest border and the operational control side of that. These halcons operate over 30 miles into the U.S. that I have personally seen in South Texas. In Arizona, over 50. And then what they do is they communicate back via two-way handheld encrypted radio or encrypted apps to what is known as Central in Mexico. So these are very coordinated operations, and they check on and off just like law enforcement. So that's how they control, and why it is so important that they fight over the plazas along our border, and why the military has been such a huge asset to help law enforcement with these LPOPs as they hold the line. So I know that's kind of long, but I just want to kind of give you a little further to it.
Senator McLaurin, let's get a question from Senator Robertson right quick.
Thank you. I appreciate your testimony. And I don't want to get too far south. I want to try to keep things up near the border as much as possible. But with some of the recent high-profile arrests, I know O. Guzman was caught, and I think there may have been a couple of gunships involved in that, where they engaged a commercial airliner or a couple of commercial airliners sitting on runways and 50 cal mounted, and some engagements like that. Several law enforcement officers killed, along with some of Guzman's tribe also as it engaged. But those the groups over there are pretty fluid as far as backfill. When somebody goes down, it seems to be there's always somebody ready to step up. Is that what you've witnessed throughout your career over there dealing with this
Yes, sir.
element?
Yes, sir. Historically, we went after the capos or the bosses. Just as a matter of fact, last night there was an operation run on Ivan again, the eldest brother of the Los Chapitos. And where the strategy is wrong historically is that we're using a law enforcement model to go after the bosses. We call it the capo strategy. That's what was done under the Calderon administration, continued under Nieto. When we talk about the cartels, what you're really talking about are dark networks. And each cartel is a different network. A cartel specifically means agreement between drug trafficking organizations historically. So they're very different. Now, when we went after the Zetas were a very hierarchical organization because why? Their structure was military. So when we went after the bosses, they were easily disintegratable, which is why the Zetas don't exist the way we remember them historically. But when you look at the Sinaloans, you look at CJ&G, some are hub, spoke, wheel, mesh networks. So how we go after them today has to be much different in the strategy that we used historically, meaning here's the way we really need to do it. The exact opposite. First, we go after their accountants and we take their money and all of their assets. Right. We go after their lawyers who have been fighting on their behalf, and then we go after them last and crush them for what they have done to so many people. The last part of this too, Senator, is that when you think of the Sinaloans today, this is not a U.S.-Mexico problem. The Sinaloa cartel is in over 54 countries around the world. Cartel Jalisco New Generation is in over 48.
Well, and I think you're leading into my next question is where, you know, what we experienced back in the 2000s, and I think you went off the job in
2016.
16.
Yes,
I went off in 15. So, you know, as we were making our attack here in the United States on the pill mills at the time, and as large parts of our country were making the unfortunate decision to legalize marijuana, we saw south of the border their business model shift where they were plowing under marijuana fields and planting poppy fields to fill in for the pill mills that we were shutting down in order to have cheap heroin to ship into our country. Now, are we finding now that the heroin market is being displaced with the fentanyl market on products that are produced in Asia and other parts being brought in? I know a lot of it shipped out of Africa, but coming up and coming in through our southern border, have the Mexican cartels pretty much sold out to the fentanyl market now, and is that their primary source?
It is, and they control it all. Now, of the two major cartels, CJ&G produces mostly methamphetamine, followed up by fentanyl. Sinaloans fentanyl first, followed up by methamphetamine. But they started, you're absolutely right, sir, they imported from China back in 2005 as we legalized marijuana here in the country, but then also we started going after the domestic labs here. And as we created new laws to go after those domestic labs, this is where the Sinaloans under Chapo Guzman specifically saw that gap in the market, and they began shipping P2P, which is the old way of making methamphetamine. I know you may remember from the old days, much worse type of product of methamphetamine, shipping that chemical directly into their labs, and then from there, that's where we got the term mega labs in Mexico. And that's where we also began to see that massive ship of major amounts of methamphetamine pouring into the United States. In 2015, the second tectonic shift happened. And that's where they began seeing the gap in the other market that was happening around the country in heroin and in pills from doctor shopping occurring. So what did they do? They imported MPP and 4-AMPP from China. And then what they've done since, though, is where they started with original fentanyl, they've adjusted the analogs. In 2019, they began hiring chemists right out of universities, the Sinaloans specifically, to run their labs. So they changed the damn analogs, and what that did is this is why we now have parafentanyl and serafentanyl, much more deadly strains, and that's why we're where we are today. I mean, DEA is saying that in their labs, when they're testing these products, of the pills they're testing, 6 out of 10 are hot pills. So when I testify before you today that we are truly seeing the weaponization of these drugs and the poisoning of Americans, that is absolutely right, and they're using chemists to do it. The problem is that Americans aren't being told what has happened.
And final question on this. I don't
Go ahead,
I don't
Senator.
want to
Yeah.
monopolize the time, but what you were just talking about, I know when we tightened up the border and we were able to address some of the super labs in Mexico, what we found is they were starting to ship components and humans over, and the super labs started popping up in Arizona and in California and places like that, where they were trying to get around our strategy. Are we seeing that? Are they still as dependent on China for components of fentanyl, or did I hear you say that now they're homegrown and so they've moved closer to our border? Because anytime we have a drug coming from far away, there are many more opportunities for us to intercept it prior to getting to our border. But if they're training and recruiting scientists from colleges within Mexico, and they're creating the chemicals necessary in Mexico, then the opportunities for us to engage prior to getting across our border are much less. So is that what's happening?
Well, the chemical precursors of MPP and 4-AMPP are still coming from China.
Okay.
However, this is what the United States government is not telling you. They're not telling you that the cartels and their chemists have already adjusted to Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India. So while we are telling the American people China, 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 and that's not wrong, by the way, you have to understand where the cartels are as a business model. They're already creating the workaround so that as we slow the chemical precursors coming from China, they've already got that avenue.
Well,
fixed.
and at the beginning, you heard I said Asia instead of China, because I know that Afghanistan's always, several countries around there have always been heavily involved. So it's not just China, but like you said, India and others.
Yes,
so
sir.
thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator. We're going to add some time to this testimony. Senator McLaurin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate you doing that. I mean, part of, I think, what's important about this discussion is a little more nuance about fentanyl and then, potentially other drugs. And like you say, there's nuance with cartels trafficking in different drugs and different quantities. I recently spoke with medical professionals who confirmed for me, no, the rumors are true. There are types of fentanyl that are so concentrated that if you literally touch it, you could get an overdose and it could kill you. Now, I don't know what the relative prevalence of that is, but my understanding is, I've independently confirmed that there are all these different types that potentially could harm unsuspecting Americans. So, definitely on board with that threat or risk, in terms of addressing it. I guess my question is, we've heard testimony from both of y'all today about there's the market side to the cartels. There's selling drugs. There's making a profit, but then there's also the threat, risk, just sort of doing harm side, right? The fact that if you put fentanyl in certain quantities or concentrations within drugs, you're going to kill people, right? I mean, that's a practical certainty. And I guess one of the things I've not really understood, just kind of watching this discourse unfold, is what's the purpose of putting such high concentrations in if you're killing your customer base? I've heard that question a million times, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess I would love a little more clarity or testimony on sort of the difference between the cartels thinking about all this from an economic perspective, like is it really just about profit and they're willing to accept the loss, or the other narrative I've sort of heard from both of you is there's a lot of intentionality to this, to do harm. And there may be some, again, terroristic type motive to cause mass harm and death. And so if that's the case, what is the motive politically for doing that, strategically for these organizations, in addition to just making a profit, if that question makes sense?
You bet. If we were sitting here talking to them, and that question's asked to me all the time, Senator, it's a great question. They don't care. We are just one economy. Now, what do you hear all the time in the media? That if the United States didn't have such a drug addiction issue, there wouldn't be any drugs coming this way. Well, we didn't have a fentanyl problem in this country prior to 2015. We did not have it. It was not an issue. So how did we get here? Here's the story, sir, that's not talked about. And I have to tell you, I just got back about a month and a half ago. I was in Kensington, Philadelphia. And if you want to be stunned at what the true tectonic shift is between the old heroin days, tonight before you go to bed, take a look at Kensington on YouTube and type in Kensington, streets of Kensington. I've been a lot of heroin dens during my day as a narcotics agent. I have never seen what I've seen out there, and it's a direct result of the fentanyl epidemic. In 2010, Chapo Guzman came into that area that had historically always been under the control of the Colombians' heroin market. And they gave away heroin for free. And they completely took it over. Now, I was embedded with law enforcement there for a week, learning which cartel's responsible, which, by the way, is the Los Chapitos cell of Sinaloa, the sons of Chapo Guzman. And what they did is they literally saturated the market with free heroin from Mexico. And that's how they took over the market. And then in 2015, when fentanyl came on board, as these addicts would come to buy heroin, they gave away fentanyl for free. You see, this is the story of what is not told to the American people, how these cartels have been able to expand, create these new networks. And right now, we're worried about xylazine coming online. It's an extender to fentanyl, but it causes much more harm to the body. But see, that story's not told as to why we have this addiction. But a real example of that is what I just gave, in that We didn't have a fentanyl crisis in this country prior to 2015. And if you look at the data from CDC, you can truly see as soon as it hit the southwest border, it was 70 pounds seized by U.S. Customs and Border Protection in 2015, and then served from there. The overdose deaths, poisonings truly skyrocketed. And that's why we are where we are today.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you know, the idea would be, yeah, I killed this customer today, but I'll find a new customer. And essentially the lethality of the drugs is not necessarily the purpose of it, but it is a side effect that they're willing to live with. Is there, I'm trying to give you an opportunity if there is an extent to which some of these cartels are trying to kill Americans. And again, I don't know if there's any evidence of that or not, but I'm hearing from you that.
Yes, sir. I don't have that evidence that that's what their purpose and vision is. Here's what they are trying to do, though, is from their perspective, they're worried about the other cartel. Their product has to be better than the other cartel. If they kill off 200,000 Americans, which they have done now in the last 2 years, they still have Australia, Russia, Europe. In 2016, I was in New York, and I was asked to brief the head of Europol, who at the time was Mr. Rainwater. And he said, is there anyone here at this intelligence conference that knows about the cartels? And they said, yeah. NYPD said, yeah, we got this guy, Jason Jones. He's pretty knowledgeable. And I sat down and I began talking to him about the cartels, and I will never forget this, sir. At the end of it, he asked me, he said, Jason, do you know why I asked for this briefing? And I said, no, sir, I don't. He said, because in Europe, when we see violence linked to drug trafficking, it is directly linked to the cartels. And where I'm going with that, sir, is that we are still looking at this problem as a U.S.-Mexico problem. From their perspective, we are just one economy, and it's a global thing that they're involved in.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones, I would like to talk briefly about, we've talked a lot about the fentanyl and the drugs. I'd like to briefly talk about the illegal immigrants and the human smuggling aspect to the border. How long does it take to move migrants from Texas, or even drugs for that matter, into a metropolis like Atlanta?
Well, it all depends on the mode of how they transport them at this point. You know, if you're 18-wheeler, whatever it takes to drive, I mean, it's all dependent upon what transportation and then also how far they paid for their route. The game has truly changed the way we remember it. So when you think of human smuggling, human trafficking, we're not, that difference has not really been told to the American people what's happening. Human smuggling is moving a person from point A to point B and paying for that voluntarily, okay? The trafficking of these people today is through the form of debt bondage. So if you're crossing the southwest border in South Texas right now, and you're a Mexican citizen, the average cost just to cross the river, which used to be $100 and the cartels could care less because it was a drug game. Today, a Mexican citizen on average is $2,500 just to cross that river. If you are Central American, it's $3,000. If you're Chinese, it's $5,000. If you're Middle Eastern or you're Russian, it's $9,000 just to cross the river. So these migrants don't have this money. So what do? They go into a stash house before they cross into the United States, and they give up everything they have about themselves. Most of them have cell phones, so they give up their home of residence and the country of origin, their family, all of their information on where they're going in the United States. The smugglers in the stash house write all of this down on ledgers, validate it, and now they're in debt for whatever that purpose is. So think of this. So now let's say they want to come to your state in Georgia. So here they come. They're allowed to cross, yet they've paid nothing. So they are indebted to a criminal organization in a foreign country for years, if not decades to come. And in South Texas, it got so bad with the Gulf Cartel. In February of 2021, the CDG was putting wristbands on men, women, and children. And you're going to see some of that today from some of the other folks that are going to talk about it. But we broke that story in February. So when you think of people as a commodity, that is truly how the cartels think of them. And if we were sitting here talking to them right now, that's exactly what they would tell you. And I would ask them at times, well, how do you know how much to charge for a child? And if it was a little girl, he says, well, what does she look like? Because it depends on what they're going to use them for. So to answer that question is very difficult because there's a multitude of processes of how they cross them, where they move them, how long they stay in stash houses based on the money they owe or based on the money they've previously paid.
Mr. Jones, thank you for your testimony. Major General, thank you for your testimony. We're going to move on to our next set of witnesses. Next up, we have Mr. Jeff Rossler, Inspector of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. He's also a former special agent in charge of human exploitation. We also have Ms. Jan Lennon. She is the Deputy General Manager of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Once again, witnesses, you have 5 minutes to give us your perspective on what human trafficking and drug crisis looks like from your perspective, and then we will engage in 10 minutes to each of you in colloquy with the senators. And senators, I just ask that we keep our questions a little shorter and briefer if we can. Thanks. Ms. Lennon, would you care to start us off?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, Chairman Moore, Vice Chairwoman James, and all members of the committee. I am Jan Lennon, Deputy General Manager of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. On behalf of the City of Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens and Airport General Manager Ballroom B. Beardari, I thank you for inviting us to participate in this important forum. At the world's busiest and most efficient airport, we take our social responsibilities seriously. Helping to bring awareness and ending human trafficking is critically important to us. My comments today will focus on human trafficking and the work we do in partnership with our powerful coalition of city and state leadership, law enforcement, and advocacy groups to combat this issue in our area. This collaborative approach was evident when the airport hosted a human trafficking press conference on Tuesday, January the 31st. Governor Brian Kemp and First Lady Marty Kemp, Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens, Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr were among the distinguished speakers who partnered with us during this event. One highlight of the press event was the debut of an anti-human trafficking PSA video, produced in collaboration between Governor Kemp's office, Mayor Dickens' office, State Representative Deborah Bazemore, and film producer and actor Tyler Perry. This is just one example of what can be accomplished when we work together. Our commitment at Hartsfield-Jackson to stopping those who traffic men, women, and especially children in our midst began in its earnest November 2016, when we held our first human trafficking stakeholder forum. Georgia State Attorney General Carr participated in our inaugural press conference, and he has been an invaluable partner to us ever since. Today, we remain steadfast in our work to prevent human trafficking, not just at ATL, but around the globe. In cooperation with our partners through our words, deeds, and actions, we made it perfectly clear that human trafficking through ATL will not be tolerated. Last year, we conducted a roundtable discussion with state legislators as we explored ways to combat human trafficking together. And from that event, we have tangible results of how effective cooperation and collaboration can be. During that forum, the elected officials and other community advocates and attendees shared had a daughter that was missing. She feared the worst. Thanks to the concerted efforts of our law enforcement partners in Fulton County DA Fonnie Willis, the child was located and reunited with her mother within 2 days. This is power about collaboration. We are consistently in the fight against human trafficking. I'd like to share with you some of our actions at the airport. Human trafficking indicators are provided to the public through public service announcements and other media outlets. We train our employees to recognize trafficking indicators and to report suspicious activity. Annual stakeholder forums are convened with elected officials, community leaders, and law enforcement officials. We host press events like the one I just mentioned, highlighting human trafficking awareness prevention. ATL, Hartsfield-Jackson, is the first airport to be a signatory with ECPAC, End Child Prostitution and Trafficking. This is an international, non-governmental organization network solely dedicated to fight against the sexual exploitation of our children. We hold forums regularly in our areas of schools to educate today's youth about human trafficking. As a result of our recent forum, many students have reported to their school counselors that they have fellow classmates who have fallen victim to this rising community issue. Marginalized citizens are considered the most at risk to become victims of human trafficking. Among the group are undocumented immigrants who have been processed by federal officials who are on the path to become citizens in the United States. Should someone in that population be identified as a trafficking victim at our airport, we help through several partnerships with the Mayor's Office of International and Immigrant Affairs, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and the Atlanta Police Department. Additionally, we work with many nonprofit organizations like Youth Spark, Catholic Charities of Atlanta, Hope Atlanta, and Espiritus to assist us. As General Manager Ballroom Biodori stated at a recent press conference, anyone who dares to attempt to traffic humans through our airport must be warned that we will spot you, we will arrest you, and we will prosecute you. Hartsfield-Jackson stand firm with our state leaders. We know that the strength of our collaboration can make a difference and has made a difference. Although we've made progress, we clearly understand that there is more work to be done to fight to end this insidious crime. We are committed to letting the world know that humans are not for sale. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lennon. Senators, do you have any questions? Okay. Senator McLaurin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Lennon, for your testimony and the firm commitment by the airport to assisting with the problem. Can you describe, and given the theme of today, interstate cooperation and our visitors from out of state, can you describe what types of cooperation the airport, or in your experience, whatever workflow of law enforcement agencies that goes through the airport, what connection that has sort of to cartel activity, anything that we've just been hearing about, and to what extent is it required to loop in other states' law enforcement and working on the issue?
Yes, so we do that a lot through our stakeholder and law enforcement opportunities. Again, what we have become is an avenue to make sure that the masses are educated and aware about this particular issue. As it relates to our law enforcement partners, Customs Border Protection and other federal agencies, it is our opportunity to partner with them and anti-human trafficking organizations to get in the same room to make sure when we have a particular situation, if we do, we know who to contact and we know who we need to partner with to get those services.
Okay, great. Is there anything approaching data or some sort of summary statistics about how Atlanta, the city of Atlanta, or the state of Georgia, or the airport have been assisting with taking down these networks nationwide?
Well, as it relates to, again, when you're talking about the airport side, that is the law enforcement arm and the custom arms. When you're talking about data, you're talking about Polaris. There are other organizations that develop and gather all of the intel and the data as it relates to this. Because we are in an airport that moves people, we move people across the globe. So we took it upon that stance, and of course with our airline stakeholders, to be able to educate those. Of course, there are certain things, crimes and things that we may have that the federal agencies are working with. We may receive intel on that, but a lot of the information we may not know at that particular time.
Sure. Thank you.
Senator Robertson.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Director. I appreciate you coming in today. In listening to your testimony, there's two very distinct missions in what y'all do. The side that you're on, your primary mission is to manage the airport. Y'all have a tremendous amount of vendors to handle the business side. And then you have relationships, and I know there are precincts throughout the airport where you have everything from TSA to DEA to Atlanta Police Department and to all these law enforcement agencies. And their responsibilities are the primary responsibilities of detecting and preventing those individuals who may be choosing to move some drugs or whatever throughout the airport. Is there a comprehensive program on the business side of the house at Hartsfield Airport where the vendors and all of the airport employees and everybody are educated on certain characteristics to look for, say in a see something, say something type program, to where there's open lines of communication from the business side to the law enforcement side?
Yes, and thank you so much for that question. And yes, we have training for all staff. All badge staff have to be trained. In order to renew your badge, in order to receive a badge, you must have the human trafficking training. So they are trained, and of course, as they renew, that's every year, every 2 years, depending on the badge for that particular company. So therefore, everyone is trained. So they are a part of that particular program. Everyone, we have digital collateral, we have PSA messages throughout the airport educating everyone about human trafficking and what to do. See something, say something, suspicious activity. When you call 911, you're actually calling the 911 center at Hartsfield-Jackson. So therefore, they know what to do and who to contact to get some resources to the location of the person.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Ms. Lennon, can you give me a perspective on how many people can we, I guess there's no way to say for a fact how many are human trafficked through Atlanta, but do we have a kind of a rough estimate?
There is, so let me say this. The airport, airplanes are used as a form of transportation for perpetrators to utilize to go from state to state or country to country to participate in a particular area in this particular crime.
Right.
We have no evidence at this particular time of where you're talking about human trafficking or children coming through because of the documentation that is needed. There has been cases where you're talking about airlines, when people are coming from other countries, they may have the necessary documentation to bring those persons in because maybe the parents had thought that they were coming over here for a better life, and actually when they get here, they are not. We have had situations where people have come to the airport stating that they have been in situations in the human trafficking versus as labor or versus if it's sexual, and we have contacted APD and other resources to help that situation. But to say that we actually have, it may be a one-off, something that we may not be aware of through the airport, we do not. But we do know that there are people coming to the airport, and we don't know what that number is, coming to our state, going somewhere here to participate in this insidious crime.
Ms. Lennon, thank you. I frequent the airport, and I know that the masses are certainly well educated to know that human trafficking is going on as you walk through the airport, and obviously employees of the airport have that training. But unfortunately, it's very difficult, I guess, to document and pin down when you actually find someone being human trafficked.
It is.
Yeah.
It's very challenging for us to know, especially if they don't report it. We do have signage in all of our restrooms in case someone is in there, and that's why it's so important for the staff to be trained, because the victim is not going to be able to communicate with you because they are definitely under control. TSA actually train their staff as well when you are actually presenting documents, especially when you have children. They have questions for that child to determine that child if there's a good association. To kind of get a feel if this is supposed to be with this person. So there are things of that nature that is done, but you're right, it's very, very difficult. But we do know there's not a mass as if they're transporting through cargo or transporting through car to get to different locations.
Well, Ms. Lennon, thank you for your good work and doing what you can.
Thank you so very much for having me.
Absolutely. Senators, do we have any other questions for Ms. Lennon? Okay. Mr. Rosler, thank you for being here, sir. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and give us a 5-minute overview? I know in your past with the GBI, you worked on human exploitation, and now as the inspector of the GBI. So,
yes, sir. Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me. It truly is a wonderful experience to get to testify before you today on experiences and what the GBI is seeing and what we're doing to help combat the issue. Once again, my name is Jeff Rossler, recently promoted to the position of inspector within the GBI. For the last 2.5 years, since July of 2020, we started a new mission to start up the Human Exploitation and Trafficking Unit within the GBI under Governor Kemp. decided that needed to be a priority for us at the Bureau. So we started a new unit, had the opportunity to start it and lead it. And essentially what we've found is over human trafficking, it's kind of the overall umbrella is human trafficking, but within it you have child trafficking, child sex trafficking, adult sex trafficking, as well as all forms of labor trafficking. One of the most recent things that the GBI has concentrated on as well is agricultural labor trafficking. And we're doing that in conjunction with CJCC, grant funds, as well as the Middle and Southern District of Georgia, as far as the interstate goes, and as far as agricultural labor trafficking with immigrants, seasonal type, migration type work. So that has been a new issue for us that we started probably within the last year. When you talk about the problems of trafficking, to me, and it's a different approach than general violent crime, in that in violent crime you have a victim who needs help and they want it, right? They're a victim of something terrible, so they're reaching out for help. What we've learned, the difference in the paradigm shift for working human trafficking cases, is that your approach is it's a victim-centered, trauma-informed approach. So your victim, your survivor, if you will, is the main priority of your case. And sometimes what's best for them isn't the end goal of putting somebody in jail, but getting them the resources that they need to get on and help with their life. So that part has been different. The main thing that we've learned here in the state of Georgia as far as traffickers are, they're actually masters of exploiting people's vulnerabilities. So they find these people and at their worst, right? And they're finding out what means the most to them and what they are missing out on the most, whether it's a death of a family member, a fight with a parent, whether it's legal status in the coming into the state, coming in from another country. They find out what matters the most, and they sweep in and they fulfill that. They're their means, right? And so they're there to help, console, and then in a matter of minutes, they're grooming them to be taken advantage of and exploiting them, and they're making money off of them, right? And so to me, when you start looking at the differences in labor trafficking, you have people that are coming over, like was the previous testimony from Jason was just tremendous in that they're coming to make a difference for their family, and they're coming to provide a better means for their family. But what is happening when they get here is that the amount of money that they're owed keeps coming up, keeps going more and more and more. So they're in debt, and they have no foreseeable way to get out of that debt. But to continue to work. Same thing in the sex trafficking. If they're coming in from another country, all their information is provided at home. Sometimes they're actually impregnating women back home, letting them birth their children, and then sending them over as sex trade victims. So that if they ever decide they want to talk to law enforcement or provide information and say, hey, I need to help out, well, then they know something terrible is going to happen to their family and to their child. So being in the fact that they're constantly exploited makes it really difficult for them to trust anybody, especially law enforcement, because from the time that they come over, from the time that they're trafficked, their mind is continuously worked on and manipulated, where the only person that they can trust are their traffickers. Right, and so when you start thinking about resources, and we talked about a lot fentanyl, methamphetamines. When a trafficker has drugs and they sell it, they no longer have those drugs to sell. When you have a person and you can sell that person for 30 minutes, they come back in 30 minutes, you can sell them again and again and again and again, and it's just continual. And the problem is they've been manipulated so much in their mind, and they're so afraid to trust others that they're scared to call for help because they don't have anybody else. And they don't feel good about themselves. They don't feel good about their situations. They're completely missing out on something. So that is the difficult part, especially when you start talking about adult sex trafficking, is you can't make people accept the services. You can't make them cooperate. And that's the really hard part, and kind of the main issue that we're having. So we've done a lot of good work in 2.5 years, no doubt about it. We've set up a human trafficking tip line, and for us that was huge, because there's time is of the essence. They may be in the hotel room. They may get a chance to go to the bathroom where they can send a text or make a call, and they don't have time for somebody to get back with it. So, having the tip line has been a huge asset for all the victims of human trafficking, as well as the opportunity for outreach and training. Right? This is happening right in front of us. And the traffickers, the bad guys, if you will, they've learned this, and they said it's a whole lot easier carrying a person with them from point A to point B than it is narcotics. Because you have drug dogs, you have vehicle stops, whatever it is. As long as they have their story straight and they're pretty solid, well, then they don't have to worry about that. So the outreach, the education for local law enforcement, as well as hotel managers, people that work the front desk, it's everywhere. Healthcare workers. It's that everyone has an opportunity to spot it, and so then it's the what next, and as far as the hotline, it kind of gives you a place to go. And then from there, it gives you opportunities as to what you're looking for. If it's a law enforcement tip, if it's something to do with a child, something for an adult, something for labor trafficking as far as anybody, an illegal immigrant. And there's also a Spanish-speaking nexus to that, and a button you can press and speak with somebody like that. So.
Mr. Inspector, you said in your testimony it's difficult for these victims to trust law enforcement. It's obviously, if the smuggler is the only one they trust, how difficult is it for you to put together a case of conviction of one of these smugglers to get the evidence and to get the testimony from the victims?
So that is the more difficult part when you're dealing with adults and sex trafficking. For child sex trafficking, the way the law reads, we're able to go in and take them and put them in safe places. And in Georgia, it's anybody under the age of 18. As if you're 18 or older, then obviously it takes a lot of work to gain the trust that we're not going to put you in jail for prostitution. That we understand that you're truly a victim, and when you're needing help, we have the resources to provide for you, and that's through different NGOs, other partners and stuff. And so then it takes some time. It's not an immediate, hey, we need to find everything that's been going on with you for the last several years. It's a process that takes time. So that is without a doubt, the most difficult part about investigating adult sex trafficking cases. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Inspector. Senator Robertson.
Thank you, Inspector, and I appreciate your past work, and I appreciate what you're doing now. I know that you talked about the migrants being smuggled in for ag work and things like that, and I know Georgia's a long way from Texas. I have to drive my wife to visit her family on a regular basis, and it's a long way. But are we also addressing those who are hiring and recruiting these traffickers to bring these human beings into the state of Georgia? Are we being as aggressive on the demand as we are on the supply?
Yes, sir, and that's one of my notes was that the demand is the issue. And so, yes, we actually have open investigations now on recruiters and the labor companies that are bringing in illegal immigrants to work, but then exploiting them and making them live and work in terrible conditions. So yes, sir, we actually are looking into that. The difficult part is, like I said, them getting the trust of law enforcement. If they were to speak out and not be able to pay their debt back home for the loans they took or the family money that had to be fronted, if they're not putting money back home, then they're literally scared for their life and their family's life back home. And so it takes a lot of courage and a lot of trust to step out and say, hey, I need some help, and this may keep me from working. And if I'm not working, I'm not able to pay off those debts, and therefore they're in danger. But yes,
I know
sir,
in Columbus we had a huge problem with victimization of immigrants coming in. And so I started a group, built a very strong group, and then backed myself out of it because I was the only non-native Spanish speaker there. And I don't know if you noticed, but I do not look like I'm from Mexico or or South America or anywhere. My wife's family is from Mexico, and so I respect the fact that there's traditions that they adhere to. And so we put together basically a group of law enforcement officers who were native Spanish speakers and were able to get into the community a little better, not going in asking a lot of questions, but going in letting them judge us through the way we carried ourselves and executed our day-to-day work, and we're able to get in there and protect a lot of them, because you're absolutely right. Once they're in there in the community legally, even, they become victims even to a greater level because of their distrust in law enforcement. Because if you go south of the border, the relationship between law enforcement and its citizens is much different than it is in this country. We have a great relationship with our citizens in the United States, law enforcement does, but when you get south of the border, sometimes things are a little trickier. So I'm very interested to watch how y'all do this, and again, I appreciate the hard work you've been doing, and congratulations on the promotion.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Inspector, one more question for me. I was talking to some motor carrier compliance state troopers. You know, our state troopers for big trucks.
Yes, sir.
Right. And he said that a few years ago, he could pull over a truck, say on I-20, and he would open up the back doors and he would just see faces, people being smuggled. And he said that we would call up ICE or the federal government, and they would take care of things. He's telling me today, though, if he pulls over a truck and opens up the back door and it's full of these illegal immigrants, that all he can do is just let them out onto the street. Is the GBI being called to investigate these types of things and to prosecute these people as smugglers?
As far as the Human Exploitation and Trafficking Unit, our concentration has been on trafficking and not on smuggling.
Okay.
Now, we definitely still partner with our
Can you tell us the
partners at
difference? What's the
HSI.
difference between trafficking and smuggling?
So smuggling is moving one person from one location to another. Trafficking, in order to prove trafficking in the state of Georgia, you have to prove force, fraud, or coercion, where you're holding them in bondage for actual labor servitude, sexual servitude, some type of a service that you're exploiting them through force, fraud, or coercion. That
Okay.
makes sense?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Senator McLaurin, do you have any questions for the inspector? Okay. I want to thank you both for your testimony today, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir.
We're running behind schedule, as many realize. You got plenty of time, Senator? Okay. Senator, you got plenty of time? Okay. Our next set of testimony is going to come from Ms. Dal Carruthers of Terrell County. She's a Texas judge. Terrell County, Texas is named after the same person that Terrell County, Georgia is named after, for anybody who's interested in an interesting fun fact. We also have Mr. Roy Boyd. He is the sheriff of Golod County, Texas. And Mr. Brent Smith, he is the county attorney for Kinney County, Texas. And they have traveled collectively a few thousand miles to be here, and we certainly appreciate their testimony today to this committee. So you three have a very interesting perspective of the human trafficking and the drugs that are coming across our border. Ultimately, you see this first, and then we see it a few days later. And like the other people who have testified, I want to give each of you 5 minutes to tell us where you come from and why you're here, and then we'll go through 10 minutes of colloquy with the two senators. And I'll start with you, Judge.
Thank you so much. I'm Terrell County Judge Dale Lynn Carruthers, and I come from Terrell County, Texas. Being a judge on the border, we have 91 miles of border frontage in my county, but my county consists of under 1,000 people. So we're undermanned. Now, earlier you heard them testify that they were moving the flow is moving from the valley in Texas to West Texas. Well, I am West Texas. So it's hitting us hard. We are part of the Big Bend sector, and right now the Big Bend sector is very, very active. But what we get in our community is not the people that are family units, because I'm directly in between two ports of entry. So what we get in my county are high-speed pursuits. We get a lot of people that are bailing out of vehicles, and basically they're all dressed in camo. They come across the country at night. They cross our ranches, and they destroy a lot of property. But I want to talk to you as a rancher. I'm a rancher in West Texas. We have a ranch that's 17,000 acres. And that ranch has been in the family for 4 generations. It's being exploited on a level that you can't even begin to imagine. We have livestock on the ranch that we have to maintain. And our water lines get busted on a regular basis. And that water, the pipes lay on the top of the surface of the ground. So when the illegals come, they bust our water line, and it takes us quite a while to catch up on that. But however, I've had a rancher in my county who's had his water line busted over 300 times. So now whenever you have that happen, on average, an average home at 2,400 square feet usually uses 9,000 to 12,000 gallons of water a month. Last year alone, that rancher lost enough water to service over 250 homes. So you've got to do a little bit of math there just to realize he is constantly working his ranch. He's gone so far as to put water spigots all throughout the property just so that they won't bust the water. Now, this is happening within a few feet of a water trough or a tank. There's no need for that. But the people that come across are in camo, and they are running. So when they come through the properties, they're cutting the fence lines. Now, the fence lines on a typical 10,000 acre ranch, on average height fence, it'll run you about $1 million. On high fence, game fence, it runs you 3 times that. I've had my high fence cut in 1 month over 12 times. This is not anything that I'm ever going to get back. We have to constantly put the money in to repair this. We're not getting reimbursed for that. When we go buy feed to feed our animals, there are ranchers across the entire region that are going through the same thing. When they go buy hay and they unload their hay has trash in it because it comes from counties that have over 1,000 people a day walking through their fields. These ranchers and farmers are being exploited. And so they still have to work their hay. So when they bring their hay and they bale it, bring it in, the hay has trash in it. It has debris in it. It even has IDs that belong to illegal aliens in the hay that they're supposed to feed their animals for. You think it's tough right now trying to buy food at the grocery store? You wait till we can't get it to market, because that's where we're at. We cannot get our animals to where they need to be. And that's just the ranchers. They're all going through it. I have a little store in a community in my county where the residents have to sleep in their store because the illegals are constantly breaking in, and they're just one business on the border. Now, my county is a very small populated county, but it's a very large landmass. It's over 2,300 square miles of land. And like I said, we have 91 miles of border. Whenever there's a high-speed pursuit, and there has been, where there was 11 illegals in a vehicle there was an accident. My EMS was dispatched out. They're an hour away in every direction from my little community, and we're over an hour from a hospital. We can't take care of them just one ambulance. So guess what? We had to call 3 different communities over an hour away just to service that. But that's commonplace. That happens all the time on the border. They're taking resources from our tax-paying American citizens. And whenever, they're calling in, we've had people in different regions in Texas die because they can't get the services that is needed because we're too busy catching up with all the illegal traffic. We're keeping up with it. The high-speed pursuits, they typically run into our fence lines. The fence gets cut by them going through, or they run through it and they destroy it. That's pretty much how it's happening. But when those smugglers hit 90, which that runs through my county, because my ranch goes from Rio Grande all the way to 90, when they finally get through some of these ranches, the chase is on. And these high-speed pursuits can end up in another fatality. Recently, we had one where 2 innocent men were coming back home from work, trying to get to their respective community, and were hit head-on by illegals evading the law. They died. One of the illegals died. The other illegals had to be care fighted out. Our taxpaying dollars are paying for that, but those 2 people that lost their life are priceless. There's no way that could ever be repaid, and we're dealing with it every day. You know, that's pretty much what it's like, just to get a glimpse of what it's like in West Texas on a daily basis. And again, I haven't even really touched on getting up in the middle of the night and I'm having to drive to town to magistrate. I live on a ranch. I'm having to drive to town to magistrate. My county jail doesn't have that many beds, so if you don't have room for it, you got to magistrate it so they can move it on. I mean, it's that crazy. And then inquests. We go on those inquests, but sometimes myself or the JPs have to ride 2 hours on an ATV just to get to an inquest to pronounce someone dead. It might be on the Rio Grande River because they perished in the river. They perished in the elements. Terrell County is known for being the cactus capital of Texas for a reason. It is rugged. It is the brush. It is very dangerous, and people do perish out there.
Judge, thank you for that testimony. We're going to move to questions and colloquy here. Senator Robertson.
Thank you, Judge. I appreciate your testimony. My wife's family's from East Texas, Malakoff, and they have the high fences with the steel poles and the cables, and they're extremely expensive because the livestock they keep behind them are really strong and do not like the fences. But I listened to everything you told me. So how are these people getting to where they're getting to? How are they getting there to run through the fields? How are they getting there to get in the vehicles and get involved in the high-speed chases? And I did not realize Texas had a speed limit, but at least some of the roads don't appear to at times. But how are they getting to your community in the first place?
Our community is so desolate, but they cross the Rio Grande, and sometimes they're sent on different buses or whatever on the Mexican side. The cartel controls it all. And once they cross the Rio Grande, they walk through the ranch country.
And I appreciate the fact there's a sheriff sitting a couple seats down from you, but are the buses just driving over unencumbered, or are the individuals just walking down,
They walk,
getting into Rio
they
Grande?
do whatever, whatever it takes to get to different spots on the Rio Grande.
Are there no border walls, barriers, or
No,
anything?
we have a natural barrier, 1,000-foot wall in the canyon, because we're the beginning of the Big Bend Mountain Range, where I'm at. It doesn't stop them. You can get up that wall very easy. You can get around it because there are old trails on it. They get through. In some areas, it's a little lower. I do not have a border wall other than our natural God-given barrier.
Thank you. And does U.S. Border Patrol patrol any of that?
Yes, sir. We have a Border Patrol station in Terrell County.
Okay.
They patrol 91 miles.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Senator McLaurin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for your testimony. Judge, if Georgia could assist in tackling any of the local issues you're talking about, what would that support look like?
Any men out there is support. When I mentioned how small population that we have, anything that you can get in West Texas is a blessing. Even if it were medical support, paramedics, whatever it takes, we need help out there. The saddest part is that, you try so hard to kind of pinpoint it. This is a bleed that really needs to stop. So it's kind of like, your personnel, your what you have to offer, and just present it to Texas and see what we can do. I mean, that's basically it, because there's so many issues.
Thank you.
Judge, I've heard about a shortage of body bags in Texas, and this is just how many people are coming across the border that they're just falling short, and the rough, rugged terrain, no water, a lot of cactuses. Is there really a shortage of body bags?
Well, what happened with me in Terrell County, because Terrell County, Texas is financially strapped. I mean, it's very financially strapped. And when I first became a judge, we had bodies. I became a judge in 2021. And day one, we had 2 bodies. Day 2, we had 2 more. Day 3, the third day of the year, there was 5 deceased. We did not, and they're all illegals that perished in the wilderness. And then it just kept going from there. We didn't have the money to even purchase the body bags, so I was having to reach out left and right, to get some assistance. But it's gotten so bad in different parts of Texas that we even have a county, is it Brooks?
Yes, ma'am.
Brooks County, that has their own morgue set up because of the fact that, so many people perish. There's a lot of people that perish in the Rio Grande that, you might find in an adjacent county that might have perished trying to cross our rugged land. I mean, you never know where they're at. But it's hard whenever you've got these little small counties that just can't afford to hardly keep going. And with what we're dealing with, there is a shortage of anything.
Sure. And Judge, obviously you're seeing a lot of human trafficking. How do you tell who is the leader of a group versus who is just a migrant who's the customer to the cartel?
Oh, gosh. We've found people in the brush where they've been left behind, they're sick, or whatever the case may be. When you do talk to those individuals, they have to get money back home immediately. So you can pretty much tell that those are the victims of this. It's a modern day slave trade is what it is. They are supposed to send the money back. The bad thing is, and I'll share this with you, we had an inquest. And whenever the work's never done, even if you get the body back in, and the coroner has to drive over an hour to come pick it up in Terrell County, even after that, we still have to work with the consulates and get these people back to their families. The sad thing is, we had a body we were trying to identify, finally did. Their family, by the time we communicated with their family was already being exploited in Mexico and taken advantage of, and they were having to pay the cartel. When a person perishes in the desert, the debt still has to be paid, and they're going to take it out of their family. So that's the reality of it. The cartel, as far as I'm concerned, they don't want to get caught. So it's very hard, for you to determine which one's who.
How successful are you at pinpointing who these smugglers are and prosecuting them?
We're backlogged as far as that goes, but we have a lot of smugglers that actually come through. The crazy thing is groups will be kind of target all over Highway 90, and vehicles come, and they're like load vehicles, and they'll load the people. Some people get paid so much per person or so much per load to transport these people all over the United States. And so it's really hard we do have a lot of smuggling of human cases.
Senators, are there any other questions for the judge? No. Judge, thank you so much for your
you.
testimony. Move on to the county attorney, Mr. Brent Smith. If you can talk directly in the microphone and help us out.
Thank you, Senators, for being here. I don't believe us Texans would be here if it wasn't a dire situation. Us traveling this far, I think, should tell you this is a serious situation. I took office like the judge in 21, and prior to that, our caseload was probably 60 cases a year. So far, we have now prosecuted over 6,000 misdemeanor cases. The felony cases for human smuggling are over 3,000. Compared to before that, we are at 67 for the prior year. So we went from 67 smuggling cases to over 3,000. We went from 70 to 6,000. And whenever I first took office, it was me and my secretary, and that was it. And from day one, I saw an increase in numbers that couldn't be explained by a normal increase in crime. I drafted a letter to send out to other Texans and to publish it, and that got a response not only from Goliad County here, but from Terrell County as well. And counties started banding together to try to do something about this crisis. Our streets are overrun. Our citizens are constantly being put in danger. We've had assaults. We've had, I don't know how many car thefts. And this is all from a county, in Kinney County, it's about 3,000 people. We have prosecuted more than the population of the entire county from coming through. This is a crisis not only for the county, but for the rest of Texas and the nation. Through Operation Lone Star, I was able to get funds to hire several legal assistants and assistant prosecutors to try to handle this monumental flow of traffic. But make no mistake, the cartels control both sides of the border of the United States. Not just Texas, but of the United States. And they control far more than just the borders. They are in every major city in this nation. I guarantee you that. Now, many people, we're trying to figure out what we can do for this. My county has actually had to put barricades, military barricades, around the school district because of law enforcement chases trying to catch human smugglers or human traffickers. They're evading law enforcement to keep the vehicles from driving into the school district, the school campus. They have to militarize the school campus for this issue. This is how out of control it is that you don't see in the media. And before we get any further, let me describe, there's two types of people coming across the border. There's the ones that you see on the news that are claiming asylum at the ports of entry or near the ports of entry. But then there's a whole huge number that comes in between the ports of entry who do not want to be caught. They want to evade law enforcement. We know that they're walking more than 60 to 70 miles across the border in order to do this. If they're trying to come and claim asylum to get a better life, why would they do that? Why would they evade law enforcement? The cartels are operating at a level we've never seen before, as Mr. Jones has said. And I don't know how exactly we can educate the rest of America about this issue, but it has to be addressed soon. And that's all. And, I might add, a lot of people are like, well, it's the federal government's role to fix this. It is their role. But at the same time, the states, when they joined the union, did not sign a death pact, a suicide pact. If our borders cannot be controlled or secured, Article 1 in the U.S. Constitution provides the states the break glass in case of emergency way to secure their own borders. It has nothing at all to do with immigration. It has everything to do with state security and protecting Texans and United States citizens. So there's a legal framework for a solution that we can see in front of us. I think what it's going to take is bold leaders and other states to help and come together to solve this crisis. Because I'll be honest with you and blunt, anyone that thinks that Joe Biden will fix this crisis at this point is foolish. And that's not a party issue. That is a fact. Thank you.
Mr. Smith, Senator McLaurin, your question.
It might have left.
Oh, okay. Senator Robertson.
Yeah, I'm always disturbed by bold people, so I think we'll be all right. You said you had 67 cases in 2021. Now, these are 67 smuggling cases?
Well, from the data that I can see from the county, in Kinney County, prior to January 21, we had 67 human smuggling cases that were prosecuted.
Okay. And, help me understand, if we're talking about smuggling, this is someone who is smuggling other human beings into Texas, into the United States. This is not just some individual who was captured for being on the wrong side of the border undocumented, correct?
Correct. Human smuggling has to do, and many of them are U.S. citizens. It has someone to do with transporting, and trying to evade law enforcement with a human cargo, whether it be for trafficking or smuggling. Yes, sir.
And when you say some of them are U.S. citizens, you're talking about the perpetrators.
Yes, sir. That want the drivers.
Correct. And now in 2023, your office is processing 3,000 smuggling cases?
Over 3,000 in Kinney County have been arrested and charged for human trafficking or human smuggling.
What's the bond when someone's arrested and charged with human trafficking in your county, Judge?
$10,000 per person.
Okay, so we've got 3,000 people, each have a $10,000 bond, and if surety works like it does in other states, there's a percentage required or property or some kind of surety put up. Where do you house those individuals who cannot post bond?
Well, I'm interested in bring that up. The other problem we're having is a lot of them are females. And the jail space in Texas, in this entire region that we're discussing, lacks female jail space. And so the cartels are using females on purpose because they know once they get caught, they'll get magistrated and then released again, for a court appearance. And we'll catch them the next week. Sometimes we've caught them 3 times, 4 times, the same individual.
How's the individual getting out?
PR bond because we can't house the females. The TDCJ, the Texas jail standards, aren't satisfied on several of the jails that we have along the border for that many women.
So if I'm hearing you right, and you're saying PR, we call them OR, or on recognizance bonds.
Yes, sir.
I think's what you're using.
Yes, sir.
Which a piece of legislation that I passed 2 years ago eliminated the vast majority of OR bonds and signature bonds in the state of Georgia. We require people to actually post surety if they go out and commit a vast number of felonies in Georgia, because we think it's misleading to citizens for them to think that somebody actually got out of jail on a $10,000 bond when somebody got out of jail because of some ink in an ink pen. So, but that doesn't solve the problem of not having anywhere to house. So now that the beds are gone, are all of these individuals being PR'd out?
For the most part, in Kinney County, I know, and I believe in Terrell County as well, which Terrell County is about 60 miles north of Kinney County. But yes.
And since they have no skin in the game, there's nothing slowing them down from going right back into the business of moving human flesh from one side of the border to the other?
Correct. We have contracted with some jails that are over a couple hours away to house 5 beds for females, but now the cartel's newest tactic is to send pregnant females, which is a whole nother game, and you almost cannot find jail space for any pregnant female.
Well, you just have to hire an OBGYN and it solves your problem, doesn't it?
I wish it was that simple, Senator.
Yeah. Is there any funding coming out of the state capitol to assist with this particular issue right here?
Yes, sir, there is, but if the facility's not there, there's nothing to rent. I don't think it's a money issue as much as it is the facility itself issue. We have to have the building. And I think Sheriff Boyd can comment on that as well, since he's, has his own jail and whatnot. But in Kinney County, we have a jail with 14 beds, and according to Texas jail standards, only 2 of those beds are open to house people. The 3,000 or 6,000 people that we've prosecuted are put into former state prisons that have been converted to jail standards under Operation Lone Star that has 3,000 beds or 4,000 beds that we can use. If it wasn't for that, our local jail has 3 beds that we can put people in. That's what we're talking about.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Robertson. Mr. Smith, you're 70, 80 miles from the border, right?
No, we share about 16 miles of the river.
Okay.
But we've apprehended illegal aliens farther than 60 to 70 miles from the river on ranches in the county.
So the cartel really has no friction of any type of law enforcement, and for 100 miles, say.
Correct. The cartels can basically walk right across the river. I don't think many people understand this. The Rio Grande is literally a stream of water that's probably waist high at the worst, with nothing on each side of it for the most part. I forget how many miles of border barrier we have, but the vast majority of the Texas border is just wide open. I mean, the only fence you might have is a rancher's fence for his cattle, and that's it. And so when they cross the border, there's nothing in their way to come all the way to Washington, D.C. if they wanted to walk all the way. And so it's a very important issue that we recognize that our border is not secure. We have caught Chinese. I think we've caught every nation except the Netherlands in Kinney County. It's that bad. Over 150 countries. 150 countries have been apprehended on the border. I'm not sure how many there are total, but it's getting pretty close.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for that testimony. Senator Robertson, do you have any more questions for Mr. Smith? Okay, we're going to move on to Sheriff Boyd, Goliad County. Sheriff.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, thank you very much for having us here. My name is Roy Boyd. I'm the sheriff of Goliad County. We're a small rural county in South Texas, about 180 miles from the border on the pipelines leading from both Laredo and the Valley all the way up to Houston. And I've been in law enforcement for 29 years. I, too, am a graduate of the FBI National Academy, Session 233. 241. There you go. And so I'm a retired Assistant Chief of Police from the Victoria Police Department, and I'm the retired Chief Deputy of the Victoria County Sheriff's Office prior to taking office in Goliad in 2021. So I am a glutton for punishment. But I will tell you right now, I've been dealing with border security issues since I was first invited by the governor's office to partake in discussions in 2005. wrote my first border op for DPS down on the border. It's either 2009, 2011 under Operation Sidewinder. And so I've been dealing with it off and on ever since. And I will tell you that never in history has there ever been anything like this on the border. That picture you have there from 1916, my great-great-grandfather was a doctor and a Texas Ranger on the border serving when that picture was taken, but he was down in the Brownsville area. Those were different times, those were different circumstances. What we deal with now is something completely different, something completely far more evil, and what it is slave trade. I keep hearing the word immigration. There is no free immigration across the border with Mexico. It is slave trade, because very few people can make it across that border without paying their due to the cartel, because the cartel ruthlessly controls that border, as you've heard. And anybody who comes across and does not pay will either be tortured or killed. And we know that because we've seen the train car loads of people they've killed who tried to come across without paying. And the cartels exercise control over those individuals both on the side of Mexico and on the side of the United States of America. And I'll explain a little bit of how it works, because I deal with it face to face on a regular basis as being somebody who has made many arrests for smuggling and engaging in organized criminal activity and different offenses tied directly to the border. Those folks are gathered up in Latin America, and they are sent to centers not too far from our military bases. And they are then, from there, they are brought over and turned over to the cartels, who bring them through Mexico with the aid of non-governmental organizations such as Catholic Charities, as you heard your airport is working with. Catholic Charities, Jewish Family Services, American Red Cross, every one of those entities is actually helping to get those illegal aliens into this country. The cartel moves them through Mexico. The NGOs have to help work and negotiate the payoffs between the local, state, and federal government officials in Mexico, between them and the cartel, all the way up to get those people through their jurisdictions. And then once they get to the border, most of these individuals believe that they will be free when they get to America. These people that are coming up think they'll be free. But what happens is they're taken across the border, they're put into stash houses, they're broken up, they're transferred to Houston, which is the #1 hub of slave trade in the United States. And from there, they go to the #2 distribution center, which is this town right here, Atlanta, Georgia. This is where they come to distribute slaves all up and down the eastern seaboard and on the eastern half of the United States. But the thing about it is those people think that when they cross that border, they're going to be free. But when the cartel gets them to Houston, they're told, congratulations, you owe another $10,000. And if you can't pay, which none of them are going to be able to pay, and your family can't pay, which they're not going to be able to pay because they've probably spent their entire life savings to get those folks to this far, then those individuals are then put into bondage here in the United States. They're indentured servants, they are slaves, and they are held throughout the United States, paying off the cartels. And we see this firsthand right there in Goliad. We see individuals who think they're going to be reunited in the United States with their family members, but our investigation then determines that instead they were going to be put as sex slaves in Chinatown in Houston or some other city. They think that they're coming here for one thing, and our investigation reveals they were being brought here for something completely different. And it's a two-way smuggling, because the cartels are also gathering up teenage females in the United States and having them smuggled to the border to be turned over to the cartel and put into sex slavery in third world countries, our own children right here in the United States. And so, like I said, this is a fight against good and evil, because the cartels control far more than you realize, even here in the United States. So I know my time is up. I will go ahead and yield to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Sheriff, thank you so much. Senator McLaurin, you asked a question first.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Sheriff, for coming here. And I want to reiterate thanks to all of you for coming here. I mean, I think it's really easy to get in your own lane. You know, we're like autonomous bots optimized for public support in our own districts. You know what I mean? And it's easy to sort of silo and think about where you live and not think about the broader picture every now and then. So it's actually kind of, it's very important to be thinking about these issues. I'm glad we're in the committee doing this today. I actually worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia for a very brief period of time during a summer back in 2011. And that was when Sally Yates was head of the office. And she was the first person I'd ever heard talk about how sex trafficking or other types of human slavery go through Atlanta as a hub for the entire eastern seaboard, the southeast, and that, you know, just in and out every day, people living their lives, you know, going to work, going home, don't realize, right, that that type of flow is happening, and that is a major human rights crisis and potential source of, you know, we've been using the terrorism word today, but, you know, organized crime at that level is happening in our home city. And so I have always been attuned to try to figure out what is it we can do, not just to stem the harm from, you know, the actual folks who are being trafficked, stopping the drug flow, but how do we go to the root? How do we go to the root cause? And what I'm hearing all of you testify to, and especially just now, Sheriff, is that, you know, you've got essentially a black hole of governance at the border. That, you know, when we talk about basic political science theories of sovereignty, you know, sovereignty is the state's monopoly over the legitimate use of force. And what it sounds like is there's a breakdown in basic sovereignty to some extent at parts of the border, because if, to your point, cartels control flows, not just, you know, people and objects, I guess, not just on their side of the border, but also on ours, then we're talking, I mean, truly it's an international issue. And that was kind of why I asked questions earlier in the hearing about political and economic conditions in the country of Mexico and other countries around the world, because I think, you know, one of the things that I want to have a conversation with both of parties, you know, who are my constituents about, is we all agree these are issues. What's going to be the most effective issue? Can we really say that doing something, an intervention just in the city of Atlanta, is really going to stop it being a hub? Or can we really say that doing an intervention like a wall just at the border is really going to solve the complex political, economic issues that are giving rise to these cartels? And so, you know, what I'm thankful for, and I'll get to a question, I promise, is the opportunity to think about these problems holistically. But I'll kind of reiterate a question I asked to the judge for you, Sheriff. I mean, if Georgia could provide tangible resources, because you heard earlier in the hearing, you know, I'm just processing everything I'm hearing kind of in tandem. You heard that it's costly for us. It's hard for us to put individual National Guardsmen at the border, station out however many feet, you know, to try to deal with this issue. So from a long-term sustainable resource perspective, I don't know that that's something we can do. How can Georgia be in coalition with your local jurisdictions? And I'm going to target this question a little more on a political level, to sort of put pressure on whether it's the Mexican government, you know, what is it that we need to be doing to solve the root causes of the cartel activity? And because we're always going to want to do harm reduction, right? We're always going to want to get people out of the slave trade. We're always going to want to stop the flow of fentanyl. But what can we do about the root causes at that higher level to cut off these cartels from getting so powerful in the first place?
If Georgia has any sort of agreements with Mexico with regards to trade, or with regards to the items coming in here, or any capacity to sanction anything with trade, to be quite honest with you, that's the only way that you can stop it. Because, no offense, we can talk about corruption, we can talk about, but you will not understand the totality of corruption that takes place in Mexico without being there, because it is on a level that is so phenomenal that it is mind-boggling. The thing about it is, the Mexican government makes a ton of money off of their partnership with the cartels, because they work together. The only way to bring this to an end, quite honestly, is to create enough economic pain in Mexico from the loss of legitimate revenue to outweigh the money they gain with their illegitimate revenue as a result of those partnerships. And squeezing them economically is the only way. And what you will find is, if you squeeze Mexico, just like Governor Abbott did when he had the inspections going on the border, the commercial motor vehicle inspections, what you'll find is Mexico will squeal, and they will take actions, and they will stop the stuff from coming across. And then as soon as you let off, they will start loosening their grip with the cartels and let the cartels come back across. They won't fight them on it or ask them to pause. You have to take, and you have to have a sustained effort to hurt Mexico from a financial standpoint. That's the only way that you can really bring this to an end, because all of it boils down to money. Whether it's the government, whether it's the cartels, it's money. And not only that, but our government wishing for this to happen at the federal level and helping this to happen. And Border Patrol telling me that they are the last logistical leg in the cartel slave trade, and our own government is moving people to cities to be turned back over to the cartel and put into the slave trade. And no offense, but when George Washington put his hand on that Bible and swore in as the first president, he put his hand on Deuteronomy 28. It's the blessings and the curses of a nation who either follow the word of God or don't. And we have gone from one to the other. And to be quite honest with you, I think that is why we are suffering what we are suffering, because we have partnered ourselves with evil, and we must quit partnering ourselves with evil, and we must bring this to an end. And the only way to do that is to understand that Mexico is not an ally of the United States. It is a nation that works against us in many levels, and we're going to have to treat them that way.
Well, Sheriff, I'll say this. I don't know that I'm as committed to the good and evil rhetoric that you're using, but I will say that I do think, the analogy of the plane leaning back the seat, how when you lean back your seat in a plane, the person behind you gets mad, and we all get mad at each other over that. Well, what we really should be mad at is the airline for not giving us space, right? I feel like a lot of times the partisan bickering that happens in the U.S. over the border is something that we could avoid if we were to think, and I'm agreeing with you on this, more expansively about our relationship with Mexico. Because I think at the end of the day, we can argue all day about amnesty and walls this and guns and people that, but if we're not addressing the root cause, which is cartel activity, and finding a way to use our political weight to make sure that it doesn't spill over the border the way that it is, then we're going to be spinning in circles, and we're going to be yelling at each other instead of going to the root cause. But that's just a comment for the committee.
And I appreciate that, but I'm going to ask all of you, if you believe good and evil is rhetoric, I'm going to ask, how many of you have sat in a small room and interviewed sicarios, people who kill people for a living for the cartel? I have done that. I've driven to the border in the middle of the night, and I've arrested them, picked them up at the border, and I have taken them and interviewed them. I have sat in the rooms with the people who kill people for money, and I know who they work for. And believe it or not, we've had sicarios go all the way from Brownsville to Atlanta and kill people and then wind up right back in our communities. This is good and evil. And it just is, the question is, are we going to be good, or are we going to be part of the evil? And that's up to us.
Sheriff, thank you. We're going to go to Senator Robertson now.
Sheriff, good to have you here. Appreciate you. And what I have found out through my time in politics is that if you want to get anything done with any expediency, it has to be done on a state level. The federal government, and I'll be honest with you, I don't care which side of the aisle they sit on, rarely does anything move out of D.C. that has a positive impact in any reasonable amount of time. But your county, does it border the border the Rio Grande?
No, sir. I'm about 180 miles from the Rio Grande, but even at that, we've discovered 16 different cartel stash sites since I came into office within our county where the cartel was stashing illegal aliens or using it to strip stolen vehicles for the transportation of illegal aliens.
Right, and I realized to get into the National Academy, you got to be a pretty smart guy. In saying that, my colleague on the end brought up the sovereign advantages that all we states have. Where does the sovereignty of the state of Texas end from a geographic location?
Rio Grande.
Okay. So the dirt at the Rio Grande, is that owned by the state of Texas, or is that owned by the Washington D.C.?
It's owned by the state of Texas.
So
there's not much federal land in Texas. We don't believe in letting them own much property.
Yes, sir. Well, saying that and making my point, then is the responsibility for and you and I have both done threat assessments throughout our career, and we've done tabletops and everything else to try to solve problems. So is the responsibility of stemming that tide of human flesh, the actual person coming over, does that not rest with the state of Texas?
Immigration rests in the federal government to a certain point. I will tell you the stance that I take. I'm a local law enforcement guy. Immigration's not my business. I don't want to be involved in it. What I deal with is the criminality.
Sheriff, Let's-
sir.
To be clear, I'm not talking about
Yeah.
immigration. I'm
Okay.
talking about criminal activity of individuals coming across the border that they did not go to any of the checkpoints. And I want to be perfectly clear, my wife's grandparents came over from Mexico the right way. They came over, they waited, they filled out the paperwork, and they came into this country, and that's the way you come into the country. And my father-in-law has been a successful dentist his entire life because they did everything the right way. I'm talking about people that are doing things the wrong way. I'm saying the immigration is the federal government's responsibility, but criminal activity on the state level is the responsibility of law enforcement in Texas and the state of Texas.
That is correct.
So, and I agree with you on the sanctions. Absolutely, I support that 100%. That we put pressure on the Mexican government. There's a lot of resorts over there that depend on the green American dollar to survive, and I wish the citizens of this state would think about that when you're talking about these individuals being humanly trafficked from Houston to Atlanta and then all up and down our seaboard. We were carrying legislation just this past week on the pimping and pandering of human flesh, and a lot of that flesh comes from outside the state of Georgia, comes into this country, and is sold with no regard to them, treating them worse than we treat some of our animals at home. But what I'm saying is who's responsible for handling criminal activity at the border between Texas and Mexico?
State and local law enforcement.
Right. Do y'all not have the resources to handle that? Obviously, the county attorney pointed out the lack of housing facilities for 3,000 individuals who were being arrested for trafficking. But other than that, is there a lack of resources?
Well, Texas is rather large, so that's a multifaceted answer, to be quite honest with you. Yes, pretty much all the jurisdictions lack the resources they need to face something of this level. And I will tell you, from my area, my experience, is I have to give kudos to the Texas State Legislature and to Governor Abbott for providing us with funding under Operation Lone Star. Because once he did that, you heard the Major General earlier talk about how the Rio Grande Valley is now has a lot less crossings than they had, and they've moved out west. Well, a lot of that is directly related to what we're doing in our area. We have formed a 21 agency task force, and what we started doing is what you're talking about. We went after them criminally. We started dismantling organized crime within our region tied directly to the cartel, because you have the cartel, you have their contractors, and then you have subcontractors. And we started dismantling those organizations, going to Houston, running search warrants on the principals that finance things, running it on the people who run the operations. And as a result, the remainders of that organization, that primary organization that were responsible for the taxation in Texas on behalf of the cartels and orchestrating the smuggling of humans, has now moved over to the other side of Eagle Pass and is coming right through their counties as a result of our action. I will tell you that if you take strong enforcement action, because it's all about money, the cartel will go somewhere where the profit margin is a little better. And my goal is, I can't stop the wave that's coming, but I can sure make it very unpleasant in Goliad County, and that's what I've tried to do, and tried to make basically our own wall farther inland. If you don't mind, I will state one other thing. I heard your law enforcement official earlier say that they investigate human trafficking but not smuggling. To me, no offense, that's mind-boggling, because you can't have the trafficking if you don't have the smuggling. The smuggling has to get them to the point for trafficking. I'm going to tell you, if you don't want forced prostitution, you don't want that stuff happening in Georgia, then you better go after the beginning of it, not the end of it. So,
Thank you, Sheriff.
thank you.
No, thank you, Sheriff. A question for any three of you. Would you classify the situation as an invasion?
Yes.
I will turn it over to the man who's the expert on it.
No, not an expert, but I believe I would. I believe the judge would.
Yep.
It's an invasion of the cartels having operational control of our border. Article 1 was drafted by a person named James Madison, who, when he drafted it, he was explaining to Virginians that it was actually could be used for smuggling against smugglers in Virginia. Article 1 is a reservation to the state of their right to self-defense of their own borders. Article 4 in the Constitution is a guarantee that the federal government makes to the states that they will protect us from invasion. Article 1 is there in case they don't. And that's what I'm speaking about with that issue.
All right, thank you. Senators, any other questions for the witnesses? Yeah, Senator Robertson.
To something you just said to the prosecutor, you're talking about an invasion, and my definition of an invasion, into the most part, would be an aggressive action from one nation to a next nation. What I see this is just blatant criminal activity. So we're the vast majority coming through the proper ports where they're being given summonses and say, hey, come back and we'll take care of you? Or are the vast majority coming across based on the cartel's actions and legitimate criminal activity?
Without a doubt, the vast majority are coming between the ports of entry through criminal activity.
Well, if this were happening in Georgia, and look, I'm not attempting to beat you guys up, I'm on your side, 100%, no doubt. If this was happening, let's say that country next to us, Alabama, they all of a sudden decided to start coming over here into Georgia. It's not Washington, D.C.'s job to come to Georgia and help us out, and I doubt we would ever ask them to. It's our job. It's the job of Georgians to stand there at the border. It's the job of the sheriff. It's the job of the agencies that I work for to be the tip of the spear and address the criminal activity and to be aggressive about it. And I'll promise you the pendulum has swung so far in our country when it comes to crime that we're having to struggle to get it back to the middle so that we have a balanced criminal justice system. And we're fighting hard here in Georgia to get that. So I appreciate your governor. Seems like a really good guy. The governor of Florida seems like a great guy, and I'd give them, they're probably tied for second as the best governor in the state, in the United States, and I think that's impressive. But isn't the ultimate responsibility of addressing this criminal activity that's coming across the border, the ultimate responsibility, doesn't it rest with the state of Texas, the counties around Texas, and then, but while doing that, with the resources and support provided by friendly states throughout the United States, including the state of Georgia, to stand up? But can't we solve this problem without the federal government if we run a very aggressive criminal justice program in our state?
Yes, I believe you're absolutely correct in all your points. The counties themselves would probably be limited to what the governor can do. The governor has, the certain authority under Article 1 and under the Texas Constitution as well to declare an invasion and repel it. Counties don't, but I do know upwards of 42 to 43 counties in Texas have declared an invasion on their southern border, and that number is still climbing. But the counties themselves don't have that sovereign authority as the chief executive of the state, like the governor does. So, to your question, yes, the governor could. The counties, no, but.
Well, I think your county sheriff, if I can reference it, I think when you were elected to office, you raised your right hand and you took an oath, the same oath that a lot of us took, and the same oath that the gentleman sitting around this table took when we became state senators, to abide by the Constitution of the state that we're in. And I think the Constitution of the state of Texas gives the sheriff and others the right to, or the obligation to do their job. And their job is to stop criminal activity.
You're absolutely right, Senator. My first priority and the first thing that I am to do is to uphold the constitutional rights of the people of my jurisdiction. And I will tell you that what is happening right now is a violation of the civil rights of the people of my community, because if I cannot go out and enjoy my land out of fear because the federal government doesn't do their job and allows these people to come in, thereby the federal government is violating the civil rights of my people. And that's why I've taken such an aggressive stance and identified and tracked down these organizations, and we're ruthless in going after them with everything we can that's within the law. And that's why we are trying to prosecute them to the fullest extent that we can, filing both federal and state cases, because we can't tolerate this behavior. I'm going to tell you one additional thing you asked about going.
Sheriff, real quick, I want to be a bad guy on that last statement you just made. It's not the federal government's job. No, and it's not a failure of the federal government. What I'm saying, it's the federal government may be confused and don't realize what their role is. It is not the role of the federal government to stop people from coming across the border into your area illegally and addressing it. Again, immigration and these individuals sneaking across, an individual sneaking across the border in the middle of the night is not immigration. Immigration happens through legal checkpoints. This is criminal activity, and it rests 100% with the citizens of Texas. And my response would be that the federal government would only be a hindrance if they came in there and said, "Hey, can we help?" And again, we'll go back to posse comitatus. The military can't engage in those situations like that. There's no violation of federal law because the individuals are creeping over. It's a violation of Texas state law.
And you're right, but our problem we had was there was a failing at the state level when I think it was 1920 when the state signed an agreement with the federal government to turn over the border and the enforcement of the border to the federal government. And the federal government has failed miserably over and over, but we're to a point now where the federal government is actually aiding and abetting in it.
And I agree with that 100%.
So, but like I said, one thing you asked about the port of entries versus those coming between the port of entries. Border Patrol is encountering about 50,000 illegal aliens a week coming across the border in Texas, and Border Patrol station chiefs and friends of mine who've been in Border Patrol a long time tell me that if they are lucky, the Border Patrol encounters 1 out of 10 people who cross into this country illegally. So extrapolate those numbers, because I have people at Border Patrol telling me that we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 million people came over each year the last 2 years.
All right. Witnesses, thank you so much for your testimony. We're going to move on to the next set. That's going to be Representative Brian Slayton of Texas, House District 2. We'll go ahead and also, for the sake of time, bring up Mr. Chris Russo, President of Texans for Stronger Borders. Gentlemen, we apologize for the delay in today's hearing. I guess you kind of got the drill now. If you can, give us a 5-minute overview of what perspective you bring to this crisis into Georgia, and we'll engage in 10 minutes of colloquy.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senators. I appreciate the invitation. I respect your state and the sovereignty you have, and I'm just thrilled to be here to at least help give y'all a snapshot of what we're going through and what citizens of Texas are going through on a day-to-day basis that is worse than anyone could have ever imagined. It's been going on for 2 years. Just to tell you, I'm a state representative in East Texas. Represent 3 counties. We represent about 200,000 people. And a lot of people think that the border security issue is just an issue for the border states. But illegal immigration, it's a national issue. Georgia's affected by the flood of illegal immigrants, drugs, human trafficking that came across the southern border every day. And since Joe Biden took office, over 5 million illegals have crossed the border, 5 million people that are unvetted, who take jobs, your citizens. They have no respect, accountability for our laws. So far this year, Customs and Border Patrol has seized enough fentanyl to kill almost 20 million people. That's twice the population of Georgia. We all know that Biden's federal government will never secure the border or keep our nation safe. That's why, for the second session in a row, I've filed legislation to build a border wall. And I live in East Texas, and people said, why would you file a bill to build a border wall? Because I realize it's all of our problem. So just several things. You've heard these local elected officials. So just think about the Texas DPS, state police. They're scattered throughout the state. Right now, they're being pulled away from all areas of Texas to go work the border. We have fewer law enforcement back home. Back home, we have law enforcement still getting into car chases, bailouts with illegals. They're still dealing with the drug problems. And a lot of our law enforcement is there. We have to stand up for ourselves. The federal government is not going to do the job. They've made that clear. And so I'm here just to tell you some things that I'm hoping for your consideration of possibly helping us. There's several items. So the first thing is we didn't pass the bill to build the border wall, but through executive order, the governor started putting up barriers. So we couldn't arrest people that were criminal trespass unless they had crossed a fence line. So for a while, we had a state of Texas putting up barbed wire fence just so local law enforcement could arrest people. And as you heard earlier, hoping they had jail space to actually house the people that they did get. And then in my bill, I had a crowdsourcing option where people could donate money to the border wall, and that's in there. The only difference where we're at is my bill charged the federal government for the building of the border wall and charged them interest. They like to tell us that we can't do this, we can't build the wall, we can't enforce because it's not our responsibility. I think we should do it anyways. And then because they say it is their job and we can't do it, we send them the invoice. And so I would ask that if you were, as the Senate, I know you can't control the governor, I know you can't control the House, but you decide what you'd be willing to do as the Senate and see if your leadership will inspire others and other states, even though you're not a border state. Donate money, any portion, to our border wall fund. Right now, it's there's been $55 million donated. The largest donation is from someone not in Texas, in North Dakota, donated to the border wall over $50 million. There are people all over the country that understand what's happening and understand how important it is that we solve this problem. But if you would be willing to donate to help towards the border wall, it shows that y'all are in the fight with us. Send the federal government the invoice for every penny y'all help us with and charge them interest. The other thing, consider some type of interstate compact where I would hope that what you would do is, you know, if maybe y'all could declare the border an invasion, and then with that, if the state of Texas declares the border an invasion, then your National Guard comes and helps. Because I believe, I don't know this is just speculation, that Georgia taxpayers may be upset if their National Guard's being sent to Texas just to process people, give them debit cards and cell phones, and those people are coming to Georgia anyways. I would hope that you'd be willing to help. If your valuable resources, the men and women of the Georgia National Guard are going to come help, make sure that their efforts are not in vain and that they are helping repel the invasion. Another thing I hope you would do is just identify the cartels as narco-terrorist organizations. There's probably some other items trying to, as mentioned by the sheriff, about getting at their pocketbook. But I just, like I say, I appreciate the opportunity to just share with y'all what's going on in Texas. But then also just ask you to consider how you can possibly help us.
Senator Robertson.
Thank you. Representative, did I hear you say that even though you live in East Texas and do not have a border, that you dropped a piece of legislation because it's good for the entire state of Texas?
Yes, sir. It's Yes, sir. It's the right thing to do. When I started hearing, and I met the people that were in the panel before, you know, I don't represent them, but I wanted to talk to them and help them because I realized what they're going through. And when I heard that there's counties that didn't have enough body bags to take care of all the dead people. And by the way, here's one of those bracelets they put on the people. I had this, someone pulled them out of a bag. There's 30 or 40, and they say they're all over the ground, all over the brush. And they treat people as commodities, and they get them across only to have them be indebted to the cartels. Now, one question I like to ask is, whatever amount they owe the cartel, how does that conversation go when you think you've paid off your bill? And then another thing that I learned from Judge Carruthers is someone dies in the brush, and this is about human compassion. It's not about political. There are families that are being stalked in their homes that are Texans. They have to be in home before dark. There are businesses that are destroyed, agriculture businesses that are having a very hard time getting along, and on and on and on. You got county budgets just being drained, resources, the crime, but then if think about the people who are coming across. If they are a family just seeking employment, do you know what happens to the people that get caught by the cartel? It's not good. And those people are then brought in the system. They owe money. And here's the one thing, like I say, Judge Carruthers had mentioned. And so let's sadly imagine someone just dies in the brush. This is hard country. They die in the brush. They go find family and they bring them through, and they never know what happened to their family member. So whether your heart for the border is on the illegal alien, whether it's on the taxpayer in Texas, the businesses, just how we're functioning, the level of crime, wherever it is, you want the border sealed and secured, because it's catastrophic in people's lives what's happening. And the whole time, as we lose the amount of fentanyl deaths, you name it, the cartel's gaining. And that's the problem. They win when we lose. And anyway.
Yeah, we got a question from Senator McLaurin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I guess, just in terms of funding for border security, I mean, there's kind of this all hands on deck mentality I think you're bringing, saying, look, Georgia can help, different places can help. Within Texas, and I don't know too much about local, state government laws, whatever, I mean, do municipal governments have the ability to issue bonds and, finance? I would imagine there's some limitation on what municipal governments could do based on the fact their tax base can only support so much of the wall, and there's a hard limit on that.
Right.
But is that a funding source that's possible, or no?
No. I mean, you have ag. A lot of these areas, I mean, very hard land. You take 10 acres here in Georgia, how many cows you can put on that and be supported, or 100 acres. You take those same amount of cattle, you put them in South Texas, and it's a way bigger area. It's just hard country. There's not a lot of rain, not a lot of vegetation. Everything's got thorns on it. It's tough. And so there's not a lot of tax base there from all the agriculture, from the property tax. So one, as I mentioned, you've got sheriff's departments and others, they don't have enough body bags, right? They don't have enough, County Attorney Brent Smith, they didn't have enough folders. They blew their budget very quickly in 2021, just couldn't even buy folders to do their paperwork. So the money's not there for the simple things, the office supplies, the feeding of the inmates, transporting. And then, a lot of their vehicles are getting in car chases. What I was told before 2021, that law enforcement, they could expect to get in chases once a month. They started getting in chases 4 and 5 times a week. And so the wear and tear on their vehicles. So just trying to keep up with the stress it's putting on their county. And this is only taking care of the illegals coming through. This isn't taking care of their citizens. And their main job is take care of their citizens, offering 911 services. There's people that are caught out in the brush. There's no major landmark to point out. They're out in the brush, and they're holding up the 911 line, calling and begging for help in another language. And then there's residents in Texas calling, asking for 911, and they can't call and get help. I mean, it's just a mess all around. So the state of Texas has put a lot of money in through Operation Lone Star to help. The federal government has done some, but the problem is the numbers of illegals still coming through are not reducing. I mean, we have a lot of numbers of apprehensions. 336,000 apprehensions, 23,000 criminal arrests, 20,000 felony charges, and 354 million lethal doses of fentanyl. That's just from Operation Lone Star alone, and that's less than 2 years. And so the money is not there. And then you got everyone's having a hiring problem, right? I mean, our jails are having a hard time being staffed, trying to employ people. Well, Border Patrol and others, they're having a hard time. We had people going, I mean, just think about what was going on then. We had people that were going to have to show some type of vaccine, like they had to prove they had their vaccines to do anything. The southern border's wide open, and all these people were coming across, and no one cared if they had a COVID test. We had businesses shut down. There's people whose businesses aren't open today. I don't know about Georgia. In Texas, there's people who their business isn't open today because COVID claimed their business, but the border wide open. And so the money is a problem. But, to have resources watching the border all day long is expensive. That's why the border wall is not the main tool. It is just a helpful tool. If we can stop just the flow and make it to where it's harder for them to get in, we can find more. We can capture more. Maybe fewer will come in. I mean, and I've seen videos from the sheriff. They're just getting small jet airliners, flying them over the border, dropping them off at municipal airports, 20 and 30 at a time. And the other things that are going on, I mean, the cartels, there's reports of thousands and thousands of drone flights into the U.S., into Texas, looking for maybe their product, making sure their product is getting to where it needs to go, maybe looking for law enforcement or where to go, where to not go. I mean, they have an all-out operation making sure they have control of the border, and we're struggling with money. And we've put a lot of money towards the border. I believe I heard something just last week. 14 years ago, we put like $40 million in border, and now we're over like $4 billion in Texas. We're putting $4 billion into border security. I mean, we're putting money into it. The problem is we aren't stopping it. And that's where I'm calling in. I believe it would it would show, I think, great leadership from Georgia if y'all said, you know what, that's an invasion, because all the problems that we're seeing at ground zero, they're ending up all over the country. Declare it an invasion, and then if you're going to help us, I would say, what would be best for Georgia? What's the best and the most respectful way of the men and women of your National Guard, the best use of your taxpayer dollars? Is it to go process people and help make sure they're bust around the state giving cell phones or debit cards? Or is it to repel the invasion?
Okay. I've heard you say that a couple times. I mean, to some extent, I've got to give respect to Major General National Guard who came to testify today. I think the nature of their service is more extensive than, sort of the talking points about assisting migrants and coming to the country. Your point's well taken that the National Guard can only do so much if it is acting in a subsidiary or auxiliary capacity to the federal government. But I want to make sure, at least in this committee today, that we respect the contributions that the National Guard of Georgia has made at the border, because that's they don't have to go there, but they do as part of a federal deployment. So
and they're following their orders, absolutely, because it's
Right.
not declared an invasion. They're going there and helping as though they've helped neighboring states with hurricanes, with flooding, and that's good and helpful. But when you see what we're dealing with, they need. Well, it's not Georgia National Guard. It's leadership. It's Governor of Texas and others need to say this is an invasion and we want to repel the invasion. And then if y'all were to be willing to help and say, yeah, we want to help repel the invasion, because that helps protect Georgia, right? And y'all, there's still all our National Guards doing a great job on the border, but we've got to have leadership saying we've got to shut it down. And I'll tell you, the Texas Rangers, they worked themselves out of a job 5 times. One time, they had a problem with cattle thieves, people coming across Rio Grande stealing cattle, and a company of Rangers went across and they killed that guy that was stealing cattle, and they didn't have a cattle theft in Texas for 100 years. We've dealt with it before. Governor Houston, he sent a letter to the Secretary of War asking for ammunition and firearms to repel an invasion from the Mexicans. And Texas has done it in the past. We're just choosing not to be as hard and firm to stop it.
Representative, thank you. We're going to move on to the testimony of Mr. Russo. Can you give us 5 minutes about what you do, what your perspective is?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Senators, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Chris Russo, and I serve as president for Texans for Strong Borders. It's a nonprofit focused on engaging Texans and advocating for border security and immigration policies that put interests of citizens first, above those of the large firms and of foreign special interests. As many of the other witnesses joining us here have indicated, the United States and the state of Texas in particular are facing an unprecedented surge in illegal border crossings, including human trafficking and smuggling. And we talked about the 5 million encounters with law enforcement since President Biden came into office in January of 2021. For reference, in fiscal year 2020, that number was 400,000. There are a couple of reasons for that, but this number does not include known gotaways or illegal aliens who were never detected. And so the actual totals are probably around 7 to 10 million people coming in a 24-month period, which is just staggering. These illegal aliens are not primarily political asylees or refugees. They're economic migrants seeking access to the greater economic opportunity and stability afforded by the United States. Of course, as we've heard, that's not always how their story ends up. They're not coming here under their own guidance. The UN and federally funded NGOs provide resources to would-be illegal entrants through movement assistance programs that provide resources and cash to help them continue on their way northward to our southwest border. In order to cross the southern border, they are forced to enter into agreements with cartel-affiliated human smugglers or enter into drug trafficking or debt slavery agreements. Many of them are sexually assaulted, threatened with violence, or die due to exposure or mistreatment. This is not merely illegal immigration. As we talked about, these cartels have operational control and operate as a parallel government, and that's why we call it an invasion. It's well organized. Enforcement at our southern border is worse than you can imagine. I have personally witnessed illegal aliens crossing at the International Bridge in Eagle Pass, where Texas Governor Greg Abbott has erected a container wall topped with barbed wire. Rather than deter illegal border crossings, illegal aliens use this wall as a privacy fence to change out of wet clothing before walking around the wall, past the often empty National Guard Humvees, seeking out a Border Patrol agent who has them fill out paperwork, and then get into a bus to be taken to a processing facility. Many are then released into the interior of the country, where they will stay in perpetuity often, regardless of the result of their immigration proceedings. The federal government is refusing to enforce federal immigration law, and now it has gone on to create illegal parole programs that encompass entire categories of aliens, as Todd Bensman of the Center for Immigration Studies has reported. In his State of the Union on Tuesday, President Biden boasted that this policy had reduced new crossings from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela by 97%. But he failed to point out that this was accomplished through a program that was created with no statutory authority whatsoever. In light of this unprecedented crisis at our southern border that threatens our sovereignty and security, and in light of the failure of the federal government to live up to its obligations and to secure states against invasions, our organization, Texans for Strong Borders, and other organizations have called on our Governor, Greg Abbott, to formally declare an invasion under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution and Article 4, Section 7 of the Texas Constitution. This would give the governor the power to deploy resources to repel this invasion, as well as grant the governor the authority to enter into agreements or compacts with other states, or even with Mexico or other countries, to provide resources to cooperate in securing our border. If an invasion is declared by Governor Abbott, an agreement could be made with other states, including Georgia, to send troops to help to this end, directly, not on federal orders. The unfortunate truth, however, is that the troops already deployed to the border by 25 states, including Georgia, have no authority to repel illegal crossings or apprehend illegal aliens. They, along with Texas Guardsmen and DPS officers, often only serve as a funnel into the broken federal immigration system where the law is not being enforced. In other words, it's catch and release with extra steps. In Texas, we are at the front line of the crisis, but with illegal aliens being transported to every state and every county in our union, every state is a border state and must do what it can to secure our safety, our sovereignty, and our future as a nation. At Texans for Strong Borders, we will continue to advocate for policies that put citizens of this great nation first and foremost. At this time, I'll yield back and take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Russo. Do we have any questions, Senators? Okay, thank you so much for your testimony today. Thank you both. Representative Slayton? Thank you. Yep. The next person we're going to have is be the last person in this line of testimony is Mr. Tom Homan, the former Immigration and Customs Enforcement Director. Mr. Homan, we give you our sincere Georgia apologies for the delay today in our schedule.
So I appreciate the invite. After I make my remarks, I just want to go over a few data points specifically to Georgia that we have researched. I want to share them with you. It'll take an extra couple minutes. So let's look at the border as what is going on. First of all, where did I come from? I was a cop in New York, joined the Border Patrol in 1984. I've been enforcing immigration law for 35 years. I was the first director that came up through the ranks. I was nominated by President Trump. I worked for 6 presidents, starting with Ronald Reagan. Every president I worked for cared about border security. They all campaigned on it. They all took steps to secure the border because they recognized you can't have national security without border security. Even President Obama and President Clinton took steps to secure the border. Matter of fact, under President Obama in FY12, I was the third in command of ICE. We removed a record number of illegal aliens, 409,000. No one did more than President Trump to secure the border. Illegal immigration was down 83%, a 45-year low. The data's clear. It's not my opinion. Anybody go to CBP website and look at the data. 83% decline, 45-year low. President Biden's first president in history of this nation who came into office and unsecured the border. That's just a fact. I mean, when you promise you're going to put a moratorium on deportations, when you promise they won't be detained, when you promise they can get work authorization, when you promise you can get free health care, when you promise that I won't give you amnesty, when you make this type of promises, the most vulnerable people in the world are going to make this trip to come to the greatest country on earth. And many of them are going to put themselves in the arms of criminal cartels who will abuse them. So regardless of what anybody's, I'm an immigration enforcement guy, but regardless of anybody's opinion on immigration enforcement, good, bad, and different, what this administration has done is caused such a crisis, such large numbers. We went from 45-year low to historic numbers crossing the border we've never seen in the history of this nation. When you do that to the Border Patrol, it overwhelms them to the point that many sectors, up to 70 to 80%, that's right, 70 to 80% of agents are pulled from the line, patrol, to process these big groups. The criminal cartels, as you heard previously from Jason, they'll push a group of 200 family units to one area, knowing that whatever's left on the border, which is very few of them, will seize to that area to deal with that humanitarian crisis because a lot of people are in bad shape and they need immediate medical care. The cartels create gaps. So when you overwhelm the Border Patrol, 80% of them off. Remember there's 15,000 Haitians under the bridge. They pulled every agent from that sector in to deal with that. There's 204 miles of border unguarded for days. Cartels know exactly what they're doing. So when you create such a huge crisis like that, humanitarian crisis, what that causes is the border to be vulnerable to drug crossing the border, criminals crossing the border, and non-suspected terrorists. There's a huge vulnerability. And I don't understate that. Border Patrol's arrested 151 people that were on the terrorist watch list, no inspected terrorists. 151 since Joe Biden's been in office. Border Patrol's arrested people from 171 different countries. Many of these countries are sponsors of terrorism. There's 1.2 million recorded gotaways, 1.2 million. If you don't think a single one of that 1.2 million came from a country that sponsors terrorism, you're ignoring the data. It's a real percentage. So what this administration does is created not only a humanitarian crisis, they created a public safety crisis. Border Patrol's arrested over 70,000 convicted criminals. That's who they arrested. Over 100 of them convicted of homicide. 71,000 criminals. 151 non-inspected terrorists. And here's what I propose to you. 1.2 million gotaways. You heard it before. Why wouldn't they turn themselves into Border Patrol, be processed, get a free airline ticket to the city of their choice, apply for work authorization, spend a couple years fighting their case? Why would you not take advantage of that giveaway program? Why did you choose to pay the cartels extra money to get away? It's simple. They don't want to be vetted. They don't want to be fingerprinted. I'm not saying every one of them are criminal, but there's a reason they tried to escape and 1.2 million dead. That should scare the hell out of everybody. It does me. So this is what we're presented with today. And how does it affect Georgia? Look, there's certain things Georgia can do. When I was down on the border, I can tell you right now, the fentanyl is going to every town, city, and state in this country. It's coming to Georgia. Criminal aliens, some of them are coming to Georgia. Non-criminal aliens, they're coming to Georgia. Why do I think a lot of criminal aliens are coming to Georgia? One of the reasons why, your sanctuary city policies. Sanctuary city policies are a driver. Criminals know they can come commit a crime, they'll get arrested, and they'll do jail time, but they won't be deported because sanctuary cities refuse to work with ICE. Now, I hear the argument all the time. Sanctuary cities is necessary because you want victims and witnesses of a crime to come forward and not be afraid to talk to the sheriff. That's garbage. ICE isn't looking for victims and witnesses. ICE wants to talk to the bad guy sitting in the jail cell that the local department decided to lock into a jail cell. That's who they want to talk to. They don't want to talk to a victim witness. As a matter of fact, if they knew there's a victim, he could actually get a visa that's a victim of crime. So they want access to the bad guy. That's all they want. So this misnomer that drives immigrants away from working with law enforcement, that's because of the mismessaging from the open border advocates. We just need to be clear in the messaging. What is ICE doing in our jail? To take the bad guy off the street. You go to any neighborhood watch, immigrant community, ask them, do you want pedophiles in your neighborhood? Do you want someone convicted of DUI 10 times in your neighborhood? Most people that come to this country illegally, once they get here, are law-abiding, good family people, God-fearing people. They don't want criminals in their neighborhood either. They want to protect their families. And if you ask them, would you rather have ICE in the jail or in your neighborhood, they're going to say the jail. Because let me tell you what sanctuary city policies do. When I was a director, 91% of everybody we arrested was a convicted criminal or pending criminal charges, which means we found them in a county jail. 91%, 9 out of 10. Now, who was that other 9%? The other 9% were collaterals. You know where most collateral arrests are made? Sanctuary cities, sanctuary jurisdictions. Why is that? Because when ICE can't arrest a bad guy in the jail, they're going to do the job, which means now they got to go find him. And here's the downside in that. When they find him, they're probably going to find others. And they're not going to walk away from the others. They're here illegally, they're going to get locked up. So that's where most of your other arrests come from. I'll argue this. When ICE can't arrest a bad guy in the jail, now they got to go to the neighborhood and find him on his turf. We have access to who knows what weapons. When you knowingly release a criminal alien back to the street, back to the neighborhood, they're likely to reoffend in the very community in which they live, the immigrant community. So the sanctuary policy number 1 puts the immigrant community at greater risk of crime. Do you think the victim witness wants a bad guy back in their neighborhood? No. It puts them at greater risk of crime, puts them at greater risk of ICE arrest, because now ICE is back in their neighborhoods. It puts the officers at greater risk. Sanctuary city policies don't make sense. These people are in the country illegally. There's nothing in the Immigration Nationality Act, the laws I enforce, that say you must commit a crime to be deported. No, you're in the country illegally. And that's the message we got to stop sending. Because the longer you keep sending that message, it's okay. It's just illegal immigration. The more people are going to, we're never going to solve the border crisis. The reason I didn't go 120 mile an hour down the highway today to get here, because I'm afraid I'm going to get a speeding ticket. The reason I don't lie my taxes, I don't want to get charged with tax evasion. When you enter the country illegally, you should know you did something wrong. You shouldn't feel safe and secure. That's the way it's supposed to be. But understand, we can't go arrest 20 million. I get that. That's why we prioritize 91% under my administration. Now you look at the current administration, it's like 40%. Because they're dealing so much with this crisis on the border. That's why we need access to the jails. If people want ICE to prioritize, if they want to prioritize more on the criminals and public safety threats, then don't lock us out of the jail. Georgia has a lot of sanctuary cities in the state. Frankly, I'm disappointed in your governor. It doesn't more. I saw when he first ran, he's going to take his pickup truck and pick them up. I haven't seen him do much since then. Let me tell you what's happened to Georgia. Not only because of sanctuary cities policies, but even the Biden administration now has refused ICE can't release a majority of the criminals. Out of the criminals that were arrested when I was a director, about 80% of them are off the table now. They're not called a priority. Domestic violence arrest, not a priority. DUI, not a priority. Burglary, not a priority. So between the Biden administration cutting off ICE at the knees that took most of the crimes off the table in sanctuary cities, let me tell you where Georgia's at. 10 states experienced an extreme decline in enforcement of greater than 80%. Georgia ranks number 3. The high volume counties with the steepest decline in removals of locally arrested criminals that were turned over to ICE, Gwinnett County, Georgia, ranks right at the top.
What county is that?
Gwinnett.
Okay.
Let me go to the states. Let me go to the counties. First of all, Georgia, Number of ICE removals for locally arrested criminal aliens, Georgia's down 82%. Huge. Gordon County, Georgia, down 95%. Bartow, Georgia, down 94%. Barrow, Georgia, down 94%. Chatham, Georgia, down 91%. Gwinnett, Georgia, 90% down. Cobb, Georgia, 83% down. Goweta, Georgia, C-O-W-E-T-A, Georgia, down 90%. Henry, Georgia, down 90%. And I'm not putting this on the sheriffs because a lot has to do with this administration taking certain criminals off the table that ICE can no longer put a detainer on. But that's a position Georgia's in. This stat just came out. It was by the Center of Immigration Studies. Jessica Vaughn, great data analysis. This is great. This is accurate information. So if you're asking me what Georgia can do to help with the border crisis, outlaw sanctuary cities. Sanctuary cities are sanctuaries for the criminal aliens. They're not sanctuaries for the taxpayers. They're not sanctuaries for your citizens. They're not sanctuaries for law-abiding. I use that term, law-abiding people that enter the country legally, that obey the law after they're here and try to raise their families. It's not a sanctuary for them. It's a sanctuary for the criminals who ICE can't get into jail to arrest. With
Mr.
that,
Holman,
I'll leave the questions.
You said under the current administration, ICE doesn't worry about certain crimes, right?
ICE does, but the administration don't allow them to either put a detainer on them or arrest them.
Right. So when I talk to law enforcement across the state and they pull over traffickers or smugglers, they say when they call ICE, they don't answer the phone. They said back when Trump was president, they would call ICE and ICE took care of business. But today that doesn't take place. Is that across the board for all crimes, or has this administration pick and chose which crimes those are?
They pick and choose what is called a priority that ICE can spend time working. As far as the over-the-road loads, I hear the same thing across the country. But it's sad because a lot of these loads are going to be in trafficking cases that ICE should respond to. If trafficking is really really a priority for this administration, they should demand ICE respond to those calls. But they don't.
So of all of ICE's resources, how many of those are at the southern border versus other ports and other places in the country?
It depends on the flow at the border. They've had thousands down there. They've had hundreds down there. It depends on the flow. But here's the truth about what the Biden administration has done. They mismessaged the American people. We need to further prioritize a smaller population of the most significant criminals because of our lack of resources. There is no lack of resources. In FY12, under President Obama, ICE arrested and removed 409,000 people. Now, with more agents than they've ever had, more immigration judges than we've ever had, they removed 59,000 last year. A fraction of 409,000. So show me where the lack of resources is. This is about this administration opening the border up and at the same time shutting down interior enforcement. That's why you see so many people being released. ICE has thousands of beds empty right now, already paid for by the taxpayer, sitting empty at about $100 a night. But they'd rather pay an NGO $300 a night to put them in a hotel. Why is that? Well, I'll tell you why that is. Immigration court data says 9 out of 10 of people that claim asylum at the southern border never get relief from U.S. courts. They either don't show up or they don't qualify. 9 out of 10. So that 9 out of 10 will get an order of removal from a federal judge. The Homeland Security Life Cycle Report, the Secretary's very own report, says this. If you get an order removed and you're in ICE detention, you get removed 99% of the time. If you're not in ICE detention and you have to be a family group, you leave 6% of the time. If you're UAC, you leave 3% of the time. There's a reason they're being released, because they don't want them removed.
Senator Robertson.
Director, thank you for being here. I appreciate that. I recognize that accent, and so the mispronunciation of a lot of those counties, you're forgiven.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I do. I got some good buddies with NYPD, and off the mic, we have some very unique and spicy conversations back and forth with each other about each other's perceived accents. Now, talking about the sanctuary cities, I know the Florida governor passed some legislation. And in full disclosure, the department I worked at, we got a little small jail that holds about 1,000 individuals, and we had a really good relationship with our friends over at ICE, and they would come in and do the interviews. And then we have a detention center not far in Lumpkin, Georgia, where individuals would be transported over, and the planes would fly out of our Columbus Metropolitan Airport carrying individuals back to the state of Texas so that they could be reunited with their families back home, those that were over here illegally or those that were being deported because of criminal activity and other things. So what has been the response of those? I think Florida passed the legislation not too long ago where Governor DeSantis signed legislation outlawing sanctuary cities in Florida. Do you know overall what the response has been to those communities that promote sanctuary?
They pretty much outlawed all. There's still a couple sanctuary cities left, sanctuary jurisdictions, and the state's working on it. I asked that question. I was over there 2 months ago. They said they've gotten rid of most of them. There's a few more left that they're not forgetting about. They're going to go after. Texas also passed a law in outlawing sanctuary cities, and that's working very well. And look, the average deputy, the average cop, they want ICE in the neighborhood because not only can they move that public safety threat from the neighborhoods, they can remove from the country so they don't reoffend. And I'm disappointed in some sheriffs here in Georgia who said, well, I'm going to have a sanctuary city and I'm going to kick 287G out of my jail because I find it racially discriminating. I don't understand that because 287G program is colorblind. Everybody gets booked in that jail gets through the system. If I get arrested tonight in a 287G county, when they run my fingerprints through NCIC, it also bounces against DHS database. That way, if there's a prior record, ICE knows about it. So I think, I've said it before, I think some sheriffs forget their role as a law enforcement officer and trying to protect their communities, which they're supposed to do, and fold to political pressure from the left. And I hate to see that.
Well, in response to that, I will point out that the state of Georgia, as conservative as we are, we do have some pockets of cities that are very liberal. And I know you experience it in your home state too, where if I go up to upstate New York, I meet a lot of people that have the same political leanings as I do. But when I get closer down to the Apple, things start getting a little different. So we do have those. And
we don't claim anything South Albany.
And to be clear, this is not, someone reaches out to your department, this is not some jackboot response where individuals come in, demand to be allowed into the jail and go in there. Again, jurisdictional boundaries are always adhered to, and no matter what is written in the media, 99% of the time, one cop, no matter what agency he's with, works very well with another cop, no matter what agency he's with. And we understand the job of each other, and we tend to lean in and try to work together and get things done. And that's always been the relationship we've had with federal agencies, even beyond ICE, with FBI, DEA, ATF, everybody. And that understanding of cooperation has to be there, so that we can solve our problems, our local problems, our state problems, and our federal problems, because a lot of times those local or state and local problems many times come from outside of our state borders, like what we heard from other witnesses' testimony, where a lot of these individuals are carried into Houston, Harris County, Texas, and then find their way over here to Fulton County, Georgia. So I appreciate all the hard work you did. I shot a message down there to the chairman. We need to get the stats you have for those individuals in the counties. I'm not going to be able to pronounce them the way you did, but we do need to address that. That's a serious problem.
I'll hand these over to the chairman before I leave.
I'd appreciate that, Mr. Holman. And if you could think of two things that Georgia could do to stop this crisis, other than the sanctuary cities, what else would it be?
You got to make it uncomfortable for criminal aliens and traffickers to come to Georgia. There's a lot of things you could do. You can.
So 287G, I mean, to my understanding,
expand to 287G.
to my understanding, there's no teeth in that, Senator Robertson. Like if the law enforcement agency doesn't abide by 287G, there's nothing that comes about that, right?
And that's right. That's
Right.
right. You're exactly right. The director understands there's got to be cooperation back and forth, and that's where they would come in. And director, you correct anything that I say that's wrong, but they come in and we have them on local charges. A lot of times the feds allow the local, we place a hold called an ICE hold. Once the charge, and a lot of times, depending on the circumstances of what the state charge may be, we'll non-process the state charge to get them quicker into the system to get them out of the country. If it's a serious violation of law, we prosecute, but that ICE hold follows, and when that individual walks out of the gate of whatever prison he or she are in, they step on a nondescript white bus and eventually end up at a deportation center, eventually on an airplane at American taxpayers' expense, and are given a flight to the state of Texas or Arizona and then deported.
Mr. Homey, would you consider this an invasion?
Absolutely. And if you want to make it uncomfortable for illegal immigration to flourish in the state, there's a lot of things you can do. You require E-Verify for any business does business with the state of Georgia. Target business licenses of employers knowingly hiring illegal aliens. Pass vehicle laws preventing day labor. Require state and local law enforcement to determine immigration status, and they can call 24/7 hotline, which ICE has. Prevent sanctuary cities, just talked about that. Empower state residents to sue officials who obstruct federal law enforcement policies. Require the majority of law enforcement agencies to participate in 287G. Require small rural jurisdictions to enroll in the Warrant Service Officer Program. Enrolling law enforcement officers in a one-day training program rather than a full-week 287G training program allows warrant officers in the smallest jurisdictions to at least serve administrative warrants and execute arrests on behalf of ICE. Enact laws making it a crime to transport, conceal, induce an illegal alien. Prohibit illegal aliens from receiving driver's licenses, license plates, business licenses. Collect data and publish crimes committed by illegal aliens. Let your taxpayers know how much time your law enforcement has been tied up arresting and prosecuting illegal aliens. Prohibit state and local taxes from funding attorneys for removal aliens. That's an administrative charge. They have no right to a paid attorney. Revise the definition of state residents to ensure state residents are clearly defined as legal citizens and lawful aliens. Prohibit business licenses, contracts, and grants for NGOs. Prevent the biggest state costs for illegal aliens, requiring agencies and social service not to provide social service systems for non-citizens, non-legal aliens. Require voter ID and clean voter tolls. Sue the federal government for failing to sue ICE for failing to do their job.
So you would consider ICE under the current administration to be liable for a lot of our problems?
The administration is. They work under the direction of the President of the United States, but this administration made the decision. The Secretary of Homeland Security has decided who ICE can and can't arrest. I've talked to literally hundreds of angel moms and dads who lost their children to illegal alien crime, and this administration will meet with immigration activists. They won't meet with angel moms, and many of them have filed lawsuits against the administration.
So you think we have claim as a state of Georgia to sue the United States government for a failure of the administration, obviously, because we could say we have an invasion?
You can sue them for a lot of things. I've written affidavits for the state of Texas with Governor Paxton. We're 5-0. I've written affidavits for the state of Arizona. I've written affidavits for the state of Florida as their expert witness. And a lot of state AGs are suing this administration. They're winning. So I think as long as this administration refuses, as long as they advocate their responsibility to secure this border, then I think states need to sue. Because what this administration has done is just not unleash an invasion. Over 100,000 Americans are dead from fentanyl.
Right.
DEA says 95% of that fentanyl comes across the southwest border. Over 1,700 migrants have died on U.S. soil since this administration took in office. That's a record by far. Criminal cartels are making billions of dollars. The increase in sex trafficking of women and children at an all-time high. No suspected terrorists arrested, like 151. And that's not counting 1.2 million gotaways. So this administration, in my opinion, as guys did this for 35 years, has created this crisis, not by accident, not by mismanagement, on purpose. They opened that border up.
Senator Robertson.
Yeah, and to be real quick, something I think the director did respond back on. I want to be clear. We talk about qualified immunity a lot of times. One thing we have to remember is disgusted as we may get with what we see, we have to understand that our friends at ICE, our brothers and sisters with Customs or Border Patrol, they're acting under the rules and regulations and policies established by the directors of the agency they work for, who are acting under the rules and policies established by the administration who has put that individual in place. So never should we consider those men and women out there wearing the badge doing their job, whether they're ICE or Border Patrol folks, as the enemy, because they're not. I think we saw that when the whole split reins on a horse during the Haitian Bridge crisis was going on, that we're always really quick. Individuals in the United States and the media are always really quick to make the law enforcement officer the bad person, and all they are doing are enforcing the laws that are on the books, which they are required and sworn to uphold. So when we start talking about who is liable, it's it's way up the chain. Is where the liability
and I agree with
rests.
you 100%. I would never advocate suing frontline officers who's doing the job the administration tells them to do. I love ICE. I love the men and women of the Border Patrol. That's how I started my career. 14 of them committed suicide last year. And I'm not saying the border crisis caused them to take their own lives, but it certainly added to whatever internal struggles they were having to see the babies being pulled out of the river. I've talked to girls as young as 10 years old were raped multiple times by the cartels. I mean, these men and women on the border are seeing horrific things every day. So, God bless each and every one of them. They're standing on the front line for us.
Senator McLaurin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Sir, you testified a minute ago that it's your opinion that the administration has created the border crisis on purpose. That's your view?
Yes.
What aspect of it do you feel was intentional by the administration? The crisis, the results themselves, or are you saying just their policies that were intentional resulted in a crisis?
President Biden signed over 90 executive orders abolishing everything we did on the Trump administration that gave us the most secure border in my lifetime. And the incoming administration was briefed over 200 times by career law enforcement officers. If you do this, this is what's going to happen. If you do this, this is what's going to happen. And they ignored the advice of career law enforcement officers with decades of service and did it anyways.
What do you think the president stands to gain from creating a border crisis on purpose?
I don't know. I'm asked that question all the time. And the only thing I can tell you is I think there's some ideology that's off tilt that people think we don't need borders. And I think also what President Biden also did when he signed those 90 executive orders is to overturn the Trump census rules, which means millions of people will be counted in census in sanctuary cities, which is going to cause a reapportionment of seats in the House. Now, that is my guess, because I've said many times, I talked to everybody in the Hill, Republicans and Democrats, said, can you give me a downside on a secure border? What's the downside on a secure border? What's the downside on less drugs coming across, less women being trafficked, less children drowning in the river, 1,700 migrants dead, less Americans dying of drug overdose? What's the downside on a secure border? Why would you come into office and make these moves to unsecure the border, which they did? Now, do I think the president wanted people to die? Absolutely not. But that's results of what they've done on the border to unsecure it.
Okay. I mean, I just wanted to clarify exactly what you meant by that, because I think it's a pretty remarkable thing for a former ICE director to say that a president intends a crisis, right? I mean, there's definitely talking points in media, right-wing, left-wing media, where people might say something that serious. But, we're sitting up here as colleagues from different parties. You served under different administrations of different parties. It just struck me as a remarkable accusation to say the president intends a crisis, and so that's why I wanted to clarify exactly what you meant.
I appreciate that. He created this crisis.
Thank you.
Senator Robertson, do you have any more questions, Mr. Homan?
No, I just want to. I appreciate your career, appreciate your dedication to to the federal government first, but I appreciate your dedication second. I appreciate your dedication law enforcement and wearing the badge first. And the 20 executive orders I find disturbing, and a lot of the things that you talk about all come about with aggressive enforcement of laws, not only to those here illegally, but to individuals born and raised in these communities. And if we just enforce the law fairly and justly across the board, no matter to whom or what time of day or night, then I think we find out we have a much greater country. But thank you again for your service.
Mr. Holman, I want to talk about suing the United States, because when state troopers come up to me and they say, we've pulled over an illegal alien and there's nothing we can do about it, I'm concerned, because there's no higher law enforcement for them to call. Obviously, when we started this hearing, we talked about the cost, both financially. My school superintendents are upset because, they're having to use county tax dollars to do something they didn't anticipate doing, right? We also have the humanity cost of it, the sex trafficking, all of that. So in your opinion, what would you specifically, as the state of Georgia, sue the United States for? Is it ICE? Is it the FBI? Is it Border Patrol? Is it just the administration in general?
The administration, the Florida AG has sued the administration. The Texas AG has sued the administration. Missouri AG has sued the administration. Texas, Arizona, Missouri, and Florida, they're the ones I know of right now. I'd have your AG reach out to any of those folks and find out how they went about it. I can put you in touch with groups in D.C. who have assisted those AGs with the legal, the legal arguments. Immigration Reform Law Institute. They have attorneys that have worked for Texas and Florida, and Arizona. So certainly.
And do you know how they sued? Did they just calculate the cost?
Well, there's a lot. They sue them with the cost of the states. The burden of cost the state of Georgia's having because of this influx, and that a failure to secure the border has cost your state how much money? Whether it's hospitals are owed millions of dollars, or your school systems, or your social services system, or police services. I'm not a lawyer. I can just tell you that when I wrote affidavits for the state of Texas, more about criminal aliens in their state and how many crimes they committed and how they got into the United States and the failure of the administration to take custody of them. So I can certainly put you in touch with the right people who can talk to your Attorney General and find out what options he has.
Mr. Holman, we'd appreciate that, and we'd also appreciate the stats. We will put them into the record of this committee as well. Thank you for making the trip here. I know you were in Washington yesterday, so we certainly appreciate that. To the two senators who participated in this hearing, I want to give my sincere gratitude to you for asking questions in a bipartisan way so that we may have a better understanding of this human cost and crisis that faces our state. So with that, this committee is adjourned, and look forward to seeing you in the future.